Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became an unwilling villain part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗃𝗲𝗵𝗲. So let's start the video. The difference between poison and medicine is only a matter of dosage, Izuku Midoriya said, tapping the syringe as he pocketed the empty vial and looked down at the bruised and bleeding teenager, his jackboot on his throat as he knelt down and increased the pressure. The young man wore an ancient Mrs. mask to match the trench coat which completed his ensemble. He couldn't speak as his eyes locked with Izuku's, who grabbed him by the throat, rubbing his thumb along the carotid artery. The nameless youth could not speak or move from the dendrotoxin dart he had shot him with earlier. Only eyes flickered, begging for mercy wordlessly. Izuku didn't need to hear the words in his mind to know he was pleading for his life, but he knew that things were too far gone as he stuck the needle into the artery, looking away as he pushed down on the plunger and pulled out the needle, shivering as he capped it and put it back into his pocket for safe disposal later. As the pupils in the young man's eyes dilated and his cocktail took its effect as they went glassy, and he waved his hand over them to close them, then placed both the young man's hands over his chest, leaving a blue rose between them. The purple fog lifted within minutes, and the sirens in the distance grew louder as he heard footsteps from behind yelling out, "We gotta leg it," before he fell over a body, yelling as the thinning purple fog revealed the horrors it was hiding in the busy mall. Women, children, men by the hundreds lay dead, all of them blue in the face with varicose veins jutting out in the last moments of hypoxia brought on by the asphyxiating nerve agent they had been exposed to. It was not fast and it was not painless when their lives were taken, as their corneas had gone milky. Whatever's in the beyond, I hope it's better than this. Izuku grabbed his partner roughly, pulling him to his feet with a coldness in his voice through the rebreather. The sirens in the distance were closing, and as he looked over his protege in the dim light as he raised the radio and pressed the button, "Curtain call, gate boy," he said before turning it off, knowing the signal would soon be traced as he pocketed it and shook the shivering teenager with both hands. "I used to think nothing was colder than death. Now I know different, 𝗧𝗵𝗲," Izuku said more harshly, stopping him from looking around at the death that surrounded them. Midoriya's tears pooled and his eyes shook violently as they traced down his cheek, looking at the red-haired boy, scrawny as a wire, despite being 15 looked much younger because of his baby face. He wore plain jeans and an all-white shirt that Midoriya had long outgrown, his own rebreather mask an older model. As he looked back at him, raising a hand to wipe the tears from Midoriya's cheek, but his hand was swatted away as they heard a hum followed by a short plasmatic burst that ruptured the air around them like a bubble. The dome widened and a crackling portal opened in the ground below them, its stability endowed as arcs of plasmatic energy licked the ground, charring bodies it arced on. The sirens had died down as the cars were now parked. Midoriya and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 fell through it. A concussive shockwave blew a strong gust of wind in all directions as the portal snapped shut like a rubber band, and the cops ran into the atrium by the dozen. A grade 𝗬𝗍𝗍, who had reluctantly taken on the role of captain at the ripe young age of 40, looked around at the bodies, scanning them for the telltale calling card. One of his men yelled for him, waving him over for the exact thing he was looking for as he snapped on an elastic glove and rushed over the bodies, careful not to trip over them as he saw the young man in his trench coat and M2 mask holding the blue rose. "That's the 12th one this year, sir," the nameless officer said as 𝗬𝗍𝗍 picked up the blue rose. He had collected hundreds since the last decade. Never wilting, everlasting, freshest scent even from the first rose he had collected when the killer had come on the scene. K bagged another one, he lamented, studying the rose. He had committed hundreds of them to memory, that every detail was a facsimile with no deviation from each other. It was as though they had been made in a factory rather than grown, a marriage of nature with the precision of industry. "Sir, he was just a kid," the officer said somberly as he took off the M2 mask, horrified to see the blonde young man. "Weren't they?" 𝗬𝗍𝗍 clicked back as he waved at the hundreds of dead children in the dim atrium, and the officer looked away. "Precision is the difference between a butcher and a surgeon," 𝗬𝗍𝗍 said as he rolled the rose by the stem between his fingers and bagged it to add to the case files, letting the officer chant his prayers as he turned around and sighed. This quirk singularity had been cancelled today, but at what cost? 𝗬𝗍𝗍 thought to himself as he handed over the bag to his forensic team, who were in discussion with each other over their finding. He had been chasing K for a decade, but his victims had always been quirks that had gone out of control, wondering if the police had to handle the hundreds of kids he put down. How would they have handled it any better? As he looked up at the waxing moon that bathed the atrium in a macabre light that radiated the gloomy scene, Midoriya and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 took a long breath, pulling off their rebreathers as they gulped down as much air as they could once they emerged on the other side. The gates near vacuum was never something you could get used to, as the split second passing through it felt like hours, as it would sap your body. Only the most desperate situations made it worth the risk, and Midoriya usually was the only one to take it, refusing to let others follow. "You weren't supposed to follow me," he gasped, leering at Katsuma, who choked as he saw the vexation on Midoriya's face. The young boy pulled his knees inward and looked away in shame, his own tears now dripping out. "I let Makio go," he bleated as he wiped his tears with his forearm, refusing to look at Midoriya. "I had to help him. Fix this." He broke down as he buried his head to Midoriya's annoyance as he patted his back. "Never become a monster to defeat one." Midoriya warmly spoke as he got up and sighed. "You almost forced my hand when we first met. Did you want me to put you down with him tonight?" he said, lifting Katsuma's face, despite the red hair and gaunt face, reminded him of his middle school days, except he didn't drain the life out of his parents when he was 4. Katsuma's eyes were red from exhaustion since last night, shaking his head. "He was my friend, you wouldn't understand," he shrieked as he got up and ran off, leaving Midoriya in the room. "Alex," blared a cheery voice who clicked on the lights in the room. Midoriya closed his eyelids, slowly opening them. Inside the workshop, the massive hangars' curved walls merging with the sloped ceiling above them. He had set up the camp far away from the city nearly 5 years ago when he took on too many kids, needing a safer space for them to be able to be free, far from the prying eyes of the authorities. "Not today, Gate," Midoriya cried out angrily as he got up, walking away from the man no older than himself. He was slightly taller than him. His wavy blue hair would always be buzzing with static, with energy that was only kept in check by an industrial capacitor he wore on his chest that siphoned it off, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit that had grease stains that hid his muscles. Like Midoriya, he was no more than 25 and had known him since he failed the police academy. "Name's Hotaru Gaylord. You just keep forgetting Midoriya." He ebulliently mocked him as he threw a wrench inches from his head. Midoriya remained unfazed since he had changed from the scrawny nerd from his middle school days. A decade of police work and his vigilante work had forced him to get stronger mentally and physically. "I don't leave others behind. He mattered to them. He mattered to me." Midoriya groaned in his lamentation, picking up the wrench that barely missed him, looking back at Hotaru, who just strutted up casually, that perky smile never fading from his face. Not when he was discharged from the academy. Not when his family died. Not even when he started helping Midoriya kill hundreds of singularities for the last 10 years. "See, this is why we didn't work out. If I keep getting interrupted, how can I be expected to work you up?" He pulled Midoriya into a hug from behind. The jump had exhausted him to the point he couldn't resist. The ordeal of having to kill the boy he had failed to help hung heavy on him as Hotaru just clicked his tongue and grabbed his wrench, pecking Midoriya on the cheek. "Nothing 'bout you ever could be straight, broccoli head," he chuckled as he twirled the wrench in his hand, flipping it in the air, sparks flying every time he caught it. Midoriya just sighed as he looked back and dragged a stool nearby to sit down, letting his heavy feet rest from the ordeal. "My work asks questions. It never has answers, Hotaru. There is nothing for me but this," he yelled out. Hotaru just pulled up a stool next to him, leaning back at a polite distance, letting his friend vent. "Each failure steals a piece of my soul. Each shot is a piece of me. I swear each time is the last, but I lie every time." Izuku broke down in tears, cupping his face in his hands as his rebreather hung around his neck as he sobbed away. "Their death is certain, but killing them doesn't have to be ugly. You give them a decent death." Hotaru jovially spoke as he unwrapped a matcha ball and offered it to Midoriya, who parted one finger to peek at the green and sticky sweet, reluctantly taking it to Hotaru's delight. "The world is cruel. It does not have to be ugly like your freckled face. Sad there's no gym for that," he huffed as he punched Midoriya in the shoulder jokingly, egging him to eat the matcha he had handed to him. "Remember when we first met?" Smiles and screams. "I miss bringing out both in you." Hotaru chuckled to Midoriya, sputtering on the matcha at the dig into their past. He held up his hand, stopping Midoriya from speaking. Yeah, I know I broke it off, but I couldn't share that head of yours when the penthouse was always reserved for you-know-who." He poked him in the ribs with his elbow, giggling. "The point is, Middy, the end is important in all things. The work is what matters, and sometimes kindness requires a certain cruelty," he said as he got up and started to walk away before he felt Midoriya grab him by the wrist. "Which is the lie? The mask, or my face?" Midoriya asked him, the weight of the heavy guilt slowing his heart. Zuki boy and icon doesn't have to explain himself. He turned around and stroked his messy hair, static making it stand on end, sending relaxing low voltage through the bushy fibers as he looked into those ragged, bloodshot green eyes. "Everyone wears a mask. You just chose to create your own. Being the delusional nerd you always were, behind your mask is another mask." He flicked his hair and ruffled it, turning around again. "Even when we were together I couldn't be with you. You always had one mask or another on. The only difference is now you're saving people, hero." "Izuku Midoriya," Ttsukachi yelled as he slammed his fist on the wooden desk, jolting the napping Midoriya from his deep sleep. "Organize this evidence now. We have heroes coming in today, and the last thing I need is another public relations disaster." Turning around, walking to the door in his rage, stopping in the doorframe. You're one of our best, Midoriya. I need you back on the field solving cases, not cataloging them, so you'll be presenting the K case to the visiting heroes. Holding a finger up in warning, refuse and I'll have you scrubbing toilets with that tongue. He growled. The police are not babysitters, and I want my best men out there, not hiding behind desks like 𝗧𝗵𝗲, he said tersely before slamming the door behind him forcefully. Midoriya gulped as he straightened his creased tie. Reaching into his drawer, he pulled out a toilet kit he kept for emergencies. He looked over the file that the captain had left on his desk. Inserting the thumb drive into his laptop, he choked as he saw Bakugo's name amongst the visiting heroes. Remembering how he had landed his seat in the filing room as a temporary clerk, falling far from grace as a detective, the black sheep of the detectives in the building, his mind went back to the day when his notebook was burned by Bakugo. The day All Might told him he can't be a hero on that rooftop. The day he fought and lost to the slime monster in that alley. All those events made him realize he had to grow up, and he resolved to become a detective who helped people while working closely with heroes. His mind for quirks and analytics put him ahead in the selection exams, given the convoluted and baffling evidence to look out for a quirk's effects can have in solving crimes. He leveraged his morbid curiosity with quirks into a workable skill set that put him above the average candidate. His attention to the most minute details helped propel him, and he learned so much more as he kept in touch with Bakugo, who would take his time responding back when he could, since UA with the hero work after kept him working closely with Midoriya. He had met Ħōtaru, who was a legacy case from a family of career policemen, most of them higher-ranked and distinguished individuals. He had never met a more mismatched person for the profession in his life who wanted to do anything except police work, but his instructors had palmed him off on Midoriya, hoping he could straighten him out as a peer. Ḥōtaru bent more than his perspective on the world that opened his mind. After Hiroshima and the defeat of the LOV, along with AFO's networks dismantled after Kamino, he looked through pages on the profiles from back then. All of the villains from that day had been lost souls. No good Samaritan to have helped them along the right way. So many amazing quirks that could have saved lives instead took thousands, all because the wrong person had met them first. He had resolved with Ḥōtaru to save the next Shigaraki before he could become a villain, so they used his contacts and Midoriya's work-study mentors to locate their first case back when they were in their last year, to follow up missing person cases in their free time. After weeks of combing through and following leads, they found one homeless boy. Midoriya had taken him home, and Ḥōtaru would stop by to help while they looked for his family. They had been together in more than one way back then. Things were serious between them, but Midoriya regrets how that very connection destroyed Ḥōtaru. He had to be careful on how he handled the situation since he had found the boy but was anxiously trying to locate his parents. His amnesia did not help Midoriya as he was going through records and cold cases. He had found a horrifying report that made him commit the biggest mistake in his life. He went to Tsukachi, who called in a young hero, Denki Kaminari, known as Stormcast. Both of them had rushed to his apartment and were overwhelmed by the child he had been harboring. His quirk had awakened weeks ago, killing his parents. The gray ash fur of the lichen was almost 8 feet from tail to head, thick as a heavy bike. Claws the size of small knives jutted out of every paw, its muzzle bloody from a fresh bite. Blood dripped from its claws standing over the kitchen counter. The parents in the file Midoriya had just read were mangled beyond recognition, and in the mountains the incident was blamed on a bear, but Izuku knew it wasn't an animal attack because no parts were missing. The corpses were just left there in pieces, all accounted for. Kaminari was about to blast the beast with a jolt. Tsukachi reached for his radio, calling in for backup. As he was about to pull Midoriya with him, the beast suddenly tumbled to its side. All of its organs and guts were hollowed out by something with the ribs exposed. Ḥōtaru's awoken quirk having siphoned off all meat from his attacker into the malevolent micro-black hole. He had managed to keep himself stable while holding 2 live wires. The arcing electricity from the exposed copper tips were keeping the pinhole-sized hole in his chest from expanding. A mini rift in reality was threatening to rip open and swallow everything as Tsukachi called in the tech team to bring in containment equipment. "Evacuate the building," Ḥōtaru yelled out to Midoriya. "I don't know how long I can hold it back." He looked desperately at Kaminari. "You gotta take me out, man. I don't know how many people I'll take with me." He motioned to his electric gun. Kaminari looked horrified at the situation. Tsukachi grit his teeth, looking at the flickering lights in the apartment. Hopping from the load on the building's electric supply, he saw the bigger lights in the halls explode from the surges as the drain from the awakened quirk was increasing, holding back Midoriya, who was struggling in his grip as he tried to get to Ḥōtaru. Looking to Kaminari, he nodded with him non-verbally on what to do. "Buy us time, Stormcast. I've called in the tech team. We need to hold out till they can contain this," Tsukachi barked. Denki acknowledged as he ran to the live wires, adding his own current to stabilize the electric flow. The strain it was taking on his body was immediately apparent from his screams as his own charge was being sapped mercilessly to hold the micro-black hole in check. "Midoriya, we need to evacuate now," Tsukachi yelled, forcing him to look away from Ḥōtaru. "Pull the building's evacuation alarm in the basement now and guide the techs in." He handed him his GPS tracker before pushing him down the hallway and going into the apartment, locking Midoriya out. Midoriya had done as he was bid, looking up anxiously at his window. Everyone long evacuated as the alarm rang out for the whole street to hear. He saw the lights flickering furiously, the transformer outside his building humming dangerously as it was channeling a massive surge from the grid. The strain on the machine and the hero inside must have been excruciating to the quirkless youth who perked at the sound of a jetpack-bound individual donning the white uniform of the hero support department in the police. The goggles she wore turned out to be her eyes as she ran to him, looking up at the light show in the windows. 𝐻𝐼𝐵 reporting for duty. Someone told me you need my babies to save the day. She squealed excitedly as she detached the backpack that jingled and clanged loudly. Midoriya nodded furiously. Follow me quickly. He led her up to his apartment, ferociously banging on the door which 𝗬𝗁 opened with relief after seeing Mei. He went outside with Midoriya as Mei entered. Midoriya, I'm afraid you're too close to this. Please stay out here for everyone's sake. 𝗬𝗁 pleaded empathically, looking at his tears streaming. We'll figure out what happens after we save your friend. Okay. Midoriya nodded anxiously and took the hug that 𝗬𝗁 had offered. Several tense minutes had passed by till the remaining lights stopped flickering in the corridor and the broken one stopped hissing from the power surge. Mei opened the door wearing a triumphant smile on her face. They saw through the door that a box-like device was attached to Hataru's body, smaller than Midoriya's smartphone but several inches thick. It had a circle in the middle that was swirling angrily and a vicious circle full of energy. Midoriya broke 𝗬𝗁's grip, running to him but was held back by Hataru, who looked exhausted but smiling nonetheless from his ordeal. No words had to be said to express their feelings, given how their private relationship had afforded them a deep understanding over the years. Hataru, I'm afraid I have to take you in for this, 𝗬𝗁 said with a deep reluctance, taking out his cuffs and laying them on the table respectfully. Midoriya looked horrified, the situation dawning on him that Hataru had committed murder even if it was in self-defense. He used his quirk to the point it had become a danger to the public. I'm afraid this means you will be censured, but I'll talk with your father to help out. Hataru just cracked a smile and snapped the cuffs on nonchalantly like it was a friendship bracelet. If this means I get to be out of Pop's hair, then it's a complete win for everybody. 𝗬𝗧. He chuckled to everyone's surprise. Midoriya, feeling the second-hand embarrassment with Mei and the exhausted Kaminari shooting Hataru looks for the casual attitude given his situation and how he had just lost a bright future. The mountain air is really great this time. Everyone should drop by some time. He chuckled as an enraged 𝗬𝗁 dragged him along while Hataru shot Midoriya a knowing glance. Midoriya, they're here, 𝗬𝗁 whispered to him harshly as he snapped out of his daydream. The trip down memory lane had been exhausting in more ways than one as he picked up his laptop hastily. Tucking the file under his armpit, he followed 𝗬𝗁 into the conference room that had been set up, ushering Midoriya into a corner that had the I/O port to the holo displays. As he set up the rig, 3 heroes piled into the room followed by the captain and 2 more inspectors, both who shot glances of disapproval at Midoriya, who was the youngest in their department at 25, where the youngest before him was 30 years old. The traditionalists were alive and well in the system, and the higher ranks were their last dominion that was jealously gatekept. Midoriya looked at Stormcast and Red Riot shooting entering the room. Stormcast returned a nervous smile back at him, who had matured quite a lot since he met him all those years ago. Their team leader was the one whose gaze he was averting as he looked away, thanking God that the hologram in the middle blurred everyone out as the lights dimmed in the room. He could still feel those red-hot eyes peering at him like hot coals even in the darkness. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 had not been happy since Midoriya stopped working cases in the field, and he was sure as hell going to make sure he knew it during this meeting as Midoriya started off explaining the murders, locations, and victim profiles. Grainy photos of K on the display throughout the years sent shivers down the room. Japan's most active serial killer, and no one had a clue, was right there in the middle of everyone who was sworn by law to bring him in dead or alive. Fucking coward, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 growled, interrupting Midoriya's long-winded explanation of the hundreds of murders. If he doesn't have the talent to fight, he should at least have the decency to die. He roared, pointing to the autopsy reports in his hands, slapping the paper where it showed the poison and paralytics used on the victims before death. The inspectors and his own team gave him a wide berth when he was this fired up, being one of the top 10 heroes. Your feeble efforts are disappointing like your face, Deku, he snarled as Midoriya hid behind the hologram, trying his hardest to keep a straight face, but the sweat betrayed him as the detectives on his side could see the massive beads running down his face. I'm sorry, 𝗂𝗁, I haven't been a detective for a while, he stammered. You didn't drop the title, just the work, shitty nerd. He tapped his finger on Izuku's annotation on the files, showing his honorary rank title. You were supposed to save people. Where's your excuse with these kids? He yelled. 𝗂𝗁, I think we should. 𝗬𝗁 started but was silenced by a bloody glare from 𝗵𝘃𝗀. Katsuki, Izuku started, shutting off the hologram and standing up to him. clutching the table desperately to steady the quivering that threatened to take his body as his blood pressure was at its peak, his head pounding from the sudden surge. "I am helping these kids every day. I don't need a camera crew to make me look good while doing it," he yelled back, the detectives shaking their heads at his outburst, mouthing at 𝗬𝗏𝗁 to stop this before it came to blows. "Do nothing, if you wish to be nothing, shitty Detective Deku," he snarled as he sat down. "I will make you an irrelevant detail in this case." 𝗵𝘃𝐲 scoffed, smirking at him. "Mind your manners, or I'll mind them for you." Midoriya shot back, spitting his response at 𝗵𝘃𝐲. "The task at hand is the only one that matters." He slammed his fist on the table before sitting down in a huff, hyperventilating as 𝗵𝘃𝐲 just cackled mockingly. "Oh, you and what quirk? Results are all that matters, Freckles, or are you just the pity hire?" he chortled, the barb hitting his mark. Midoriya's face was contorted, but before he could stand up, 𝗬𝗏𝗁 was already behind him, forcing him to remain seated with both palms on his shoulders. "Progress comes at a price others aren't willing to pay," 𝗬𝗏𝗁 started, leering at 𝗵𝘃𝐲's abrasive behavior. "Throw scraps to the hungry. And they thank you for the feast. I'm quirkless too, and just like me, Izuku has closed 95% of the cases even as a quirkless detective. He sees things the rest of us miss because he knows what it is to be left behind." He spoke slowly with great focus and impetus. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 only scoffed, waving his hand. "Solving every case except the one that really matters." 𝗵𝘃𝐲 shot off, those red eyes laser-locked with Midoriya's burning green ones. "He's still the same useless nerd since we were 4. Give it up and let the us pros handle this, you extra." 𝗵𝘃𝐲 growled, smashing his fist into his palm, igniting a blinding spark that made everyone flinch as he wore a Cheshire grin from ear to ear. "Izuku didn't fail. We all have dynamite." 𝗬𝗏𝗁 glowered at him. "Teams sync together and Izuku will be the tide that raises all boats. I remember him helping your cases just fine when you were the new hero on the block when no other cop wanted to work with you, including myself," he chided. The barb stung 𝗵𝘃𝐲. "Yeah, well, he just had good luck back then. Let's see if this shitty nerd can make lightning strike twice." 𝗵𝘃𝐲 barked, crossing his arms. Like the good old days you're talking about. Let's try that again, shitty detective." He held out his hand despite being several feet away from Midoriya. Izuku had known 𝗵𝘃𝐲 since they were kids. He knew this was his own brand of tough love since they were kids. Everyone suddenly wanted him back out there when he had just found a delicate balance in his life. He was more anxious about working with 𝗵𝘃𝐲 again because he knew him well and 𝗵𝘃𝐲 knew him even better. There was no hiding anything from him like last time. The reason why he was bullied so badly in middle school by him was because he caught on to the feelings Izuku had for him and he didn't process it well. Things had improved when they worked together and he was his police attaché, but since the incident he broke down from guilt. Though now that he put 2 and 2 together, he understood that 𝗬𝗏𝗁 had invited 𝗵𝘃𝐲 and dragged him into the meeting to give him this push into the field. He remembered all the things that built up the wellspring of guilt that had left him crippled for the field and fueled 𝗵𝘃𝐲's obsession with Haruo taking the fall for him, trying to make it work with Midoriya despite becoming a detective while Haruo was a mechanic. The closeness with 𝗵𝘃𝐲 during work that stirred feelings within him he didn't want to act on, fighting the temptation at every turn, continuing the search for lost souls and helping them, hiding the deaths of those he failed for years from Haruo and 𝗵𝘃𝐲. Time flew by. Hundreds of cases had come and been solved, except the grinding axe of the K murders. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 had found him by sheer luck while on patrol, blowing off his mask with a well-timed ambush, leaving Midoriya at his mercy as 𝗵𝘃𝐲 processed his rage at finding out his identity that night, causing a psychotic break in them both. Haruo had not been far behind, trailing Izuku that night like many nights before, making up his mind about the situation if he could really support Midoriya's actions, determined to know the reason Midoriya was a serial killer and if was good enough to stay with him or turn him in. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 had seen his face and Haruo almost killed him to protect Midoriya's freedom that night. He didn't want him to take another fall for him. He wanted to turn himself in and come clean to the authorities, but Haruo talked him out of it. They had brought 𝗵𝘃𝐲 to a shadow broker who arranged a memory wipe for a price that Haruo never revealed to Izuku. All he knew, it cost him their relationship since that night, and they were never the same since. He had retreated to his desk like a hermit crab in its shell ever since, shivering from the terror he felt that night once more, the PTSD threatening to overwhelm him when he remembered how he was almost exposed in the past. As he went over to 𝗵𝘃𝐲's side, 𝗬𝗏𝗁 following closely to supervise as 𝗵𝘃𝐲 shook his hand. Feigning innocence is going to be so time-consuming, thought Izuku, thinking of how exhausted he had been lately, thinking of how Haruo would react to this news tonight. All he knew was either 𝗵𝘃𝐲 would kill him or Haruo would. He just couldn't do anything right. "Oh, is that all?" Haruo spoke nonchalantly, massaging his greasy hands with a clean washcloth from his toolbox, smirking at Midoriya as he leered at him. Haruo just curled his lip, feigning a pout as he threw the rag at him before slamming the maintenance hatch to the helicopter closed, twisting the switch to seal the compartment with a satisfying hiss as he knocked it a few times for good luck as mechanics do. Midoriya only coughed more insistently, letting him know he was on a short leash at the office today, more than he usually was. Mids, listen. Hotaru turned around and held his hands up in surrender. You can't just slap some cuffs on me to get these kinds of things out of me anymore. He shot a wink. Least take me out to dinner like you used to. He shrugged his shoulders as he slammed his toolbox shut with a clang that rang out through the massive hangar. He was doing his best to defuse the situation, but he could tell that Bakugo had rattled Midoriya as he always did to his annoyance. His absence was not missed by Hotaru, who handled brooding Midoriya just fine. All he had to do was cheer him up with distractions and deflections for the last few years. Serious Midoriya was always a wet blanket that was too much work for his taste, and it was him staring at him today like some howling abyss as he crossed his arms, staring back into the gaping darkness. Look, we had a deal, Izuku, my dear. He sat down on the helicopter's skid, clasping his hands together and twiddling his thumbs over his mouth to let him know he was serious as well now. I bailed you out and helped you with all of this. He waved his hands along the hangar. I bought the farm for the kids, opened up shop out in the boonies. He paused, looking at him with a spark of ecstasy from his mischievous eyes. You agreed to drop it, remember. Is this because of him again? His Cheshire grin twisted ear to ear behind his hands, covering his mouth as he saw Midoriya clenching his fists at his sides. He could hear his molars grinding even from this distance in the vacant hangar, every rebuke echoing off the walls. Nothing happened back then and nothing will happen. Midoriya croaked defensively, desperately trying to find his voice at the bitter memory. Only because Thunderclap won't let shit happen. He can't cheat with you when he's already married to himself. Hotaru chuckled maliciously, relishing the low blow as Midoriya reeled from it, anxiously trying to collect himself as he fell from the seams, years of unspoken frustrations being cast at him stinging like thorns from the normally rosy Hotaru. You accepted me, he didn't. Midoriya's solitary tear streamed down his cheek, biting his lip as he dug deep for a modicum of courage as he faced Hotaru. You paid the price every time, I just want to. Midoriya's voice caught in his throat as he struggled to find the right word. Check the bill. Pay your share after so many years. Hotaru snickered as he got to his feet and walked towards Midoriya. The stare down intensified as he got more serious, the jovial demeanor fading away as static as he stopped inches away from him. You know why I really call him Thunderclap? He asked rhetorically. Midoriya knew not to interrupt when Hotaru got on his soapbox like this. He's got so much energy, but he wastes it being a prima donna, being loud, scary, and useless. He pulled Midoriya in, setting his chin on his shoulder. I know I'm much worse, but I don't go around thinking I'm better than you, Zuki. You always deserve better than us. Midoriya settled in, stroking Hotaru's back tenderly since that night all those years ago, always wondering what caused the schism between them, anxious to hear the answer finally while Hotaru was in mood to share. I just did my job like you do yours. He hinted at his nightly activities. I had to cash in favors with Pops. Let a criminal go, hide some evidence, let someone stay the night till the heat died down. That's all, I swear. He sighed as he loosened his grip and pulled away from Midoriya. The temptation from both parties to magnetic, pulled apart by a force greater than attraction, the gravitas of the situation. I'm pretty much a criminal myself at this point, so yay copper, cuff me. He grinned as he held out his wrists. Midoriya clasped his hands and sighed. It's not like that with him. It hasn't been for a long time. Hotaru pulled his hands back slowly, withdrawing. I love long walks, Mids, but you think I enjoyed following you two around, skulking in the shadows. The more I saw how well you clicked together, the more I realized how little we did. He placed his palm on Midoriya's chest gently. You might have room in there for one more. He pointed at his own chest, the humming supercapacitor word as he pressed down on it. I don't, Izuku. Midoriya. A solitary pearly drop dropping down his cheek before Midoriya's thumb could only wipe it. Face facts, I can't have what you two could have. That's the real reason I broke it off. You need to scratch the itch I can't satisfy, Hotaru said somberly as he turned away and waved off Midoriya. Hotaru, I. Midoriya stammered, glued to the spot as he saw him walk to his room near the helicopter, locking the door behind him with a loud click that echoed throughout the cavernous hangar. He pulled out his phone and sighed as he saw dozens of texts from Tsukachi and Bakugo. He rushed to his car, tossing the phone back into his pocket as he revved the car into top gear to rush to the scene of his first crime in the field since that night. Wiping his tears, his heart sank as the massive hangar shrunk in his rear-view mirror, the feeling of security rapidly draining from him. Midoriya was haunted. Knowing how hard things were going to get with his packed schedule, he just couldn't save people as much as he thought he could, wondering if he should just turn himself in right now so he can finally sleep, even if it was in a cell. 8 hours of sleep was a luxury he had not known for quite some time, and he grew weary of being the dancing bear in his three-ring circus as he fought back his exhaustion. Like everything today, it was another struggle he was losing all too easily. Midoriya had rushed into the precinct, muttering curses under his breath as he dashed through the halls to many surprised and judgmental looks from the many officers and detectives on duty. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 had been sticking his neck out for Midoriya all the way from his selection till today, trusting his investment would pay off someday, but Midoriya always felt the crushing weight on his shoulders from that expectation. Yet thankful that he got to serve the public in some capacity with hand-holding, soon turning to coddling to many departmental objections that were hand-waved. Now the one day he could have started returning the long-overdue debt he had already messed up by being late. He had already cut Ḥotaru deeper than he had thought, and now 𝗧𝗏𝗁 was on the chopping block if he kept this up. He doubled over in the corridor, taking the chance to catch his breath and straighten himself up as best as he could before he entered the room, knowing he had already ruined the meeting, so the best case today was not making it worse for his mentor as he trembled while reaching for the door. His hand steadied as it turned the knob, and he entered to a room full of eyes that felt like sniper dots landing on him. He felt his heart skip a beat as he shuffled in his walk of shame to 𝗧𝗏𝗁. Everyone's gaze followed him before he took his seat between 𝗧𝗏𝗁 and Bakugo, right where the nameplate told him to do so. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 cleared his throat as he stood up and clicked a remote that thankfully drowned the room in darkness, his presentation loaded for all the attention to shift there. Midoriya felt a stab in his rib from Bakugo's side, those bloody red eyes leering at him as he stole a glance, then feigned interest in the presentation, still feeling them bore into the back of his skull as he tried to zone him out. In conclusion, we feel we have a break in the case with K. Detective Midoriya has rejoined the task force after concluding his sabbatical. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 put his hand on Midoriya's shoulder. The menacing gazes once again zeroed on him once more. We have also requisitioned the number 3 hero to confront K. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 added abruptly, trying to pull the heat away from Midoriya as the audience wasn't fond of the villainous hero Dynamite. Just as Genis had warned, keeping Murder Explosion God in your official hero name would not help things when he went pro, and the room confirmed Genis' sentiments. Bakugo just glared back at them like a mad dog, deciding which one he was going to bite first as he saw them murmur amongst themselves. With the lights back on, Midoriya's eyes widened as he recognized many prominent members of the press present. Stormcast and Red Riot were not present today since they were covering his patrol, but their real value in keeping Dynamite from his self-destructive behavior was lost today as Bakugo got up and answered the question that hung in the air. My victory was decided the moment I was born, Bakugo exclaimed in the brashest tone he could muster, pointing a finger aggressively at the press. So make sure you catch my good side when I bring in this poser. I'll kill anyone who takes a shitty picture. He slammed his fist on the table to Midoriya and 𝗧𝗏𝗁 horror as Bakugo sat down again and crossed his arms, daring them to ask any further questions while they were jotting down their notes and checking their feeds for edits. They quickly pivoted and turned to Midoriya, who certainly didn't want to embarrass 𝗧𝗏𝗁 more than he already had, as the first question hit him like a truck. How do you respond to the rumors that you were involved with the former police chief's son's dismissal? Is there any truth that your relationship was more intimate? Midoriya swallowed as he faced the cameras. The silence was broken before he could part his lips as 𝗧𝗏𝗁 slammed the table in protest. We are here to announce the task force for catching a killer. Refrain from these misinformed questions, he said sternly, peering coldly at the press. If you aren't interested in helping us find the most active serial killer in Japan's history, then leave. He pointed sharply at the door. Many people on the press team shuffled uncomfortably as they directed all questions to 𝗧𝗏𝗁, to Midoriya's relief that was punctured by a jab from Bakugo, who stuffed a folded note into his back pocket, gnashing his teeth like a rabid wolf when Midoriya reflexively looked at him through the corner of his eye. His warning didn't need words as he kept looking normally at the press, who had moved on to peppering 𝗧𝗏𝗁 and were ignoring them for the moment. Midoriya discreetly pulled out the note and unfolded it under the table. His eyes rolled down slowly as he read the words, "Meet me after work alone with the calling card for a small host club in Kabukicho cloistered in a remote location within Shinjuku called the 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 he pocketed it discreetly. Muttering to himself under his breath in his panic, Haru's words hit every mark with all his fears confirmed in one note. Midoriya was losing it, being torn by his feelings to his work, to his personal life. All he wanted was a good night's sleep in the safety of someone's strong arms. He just couldn't seem to decide how this task force was going to work and how he would continue his mission to help these kids while being dragged from under the radar into the spotlight so visibly into the field. Last time he tried, Bakugo nearly died and took him with himself as he was fighting the compulsion to rip out his hair and yell at the top of his lungs. Tsukachi, being the seasoned veteran he was, gave the press their puff piece for the crime section, while Bakugo had given them his signature threat that had established him as number 3 most villainous hero for the hero papers. They filed out of the room as Tsukachi leaned on his haunches, exhausted as though he had run a marathon. "Midoriya, I will have a talk about your tardiness tomorrow. For now, leave the room and attend to your desk while I have a word with Dynamite here on press protocol for future meetings," he said, leering at Bakugo, who locked back. Midoriya knew better than to get involved as he just nodded and left the room as fast as his trembling legs could take him. As he got back to his desk, he took out his folders examining his leads in Shinjuku. He always kept a kit locked in his drawer securely at work in case he came upon a sudden epiphany and would have to act promptly. He was looking for the traffickers who had taken in Makio and used him to attack them all. Looking at the map, he had crossed out many suspects, with the red tags, leaving only one person who was a former member of the disbanded Shai Hassaikai. 𝗵𝗵𝗲, also known as the Confessor, who had been under the radar since his parole as Class C villain with a low public threat rating score due to the lack of combat skills, and his truth quirk didn't make him dangerous enough to be in Tartarus. Given the overflows in the prison system, people like him were thrown back into society, hoping they would float aimlessly like dregs without their leader Chisaki, who was still in his cell in Tartarus. Midoriya clenched his fist as he saw from the suspects he had crossed out in his file. After having rendered his judgment on them, he took out the small box that contained the darts with the dendrotoxin. A small flute he could use as an instrument, with the real intent being a concealed blowing tube to launch the small darts at his prey. The sanguine vials that were in his drawer's false bottom were the fruits of years of research. The origin of this deadly cocktail was in his darkest hour, when he wanted a silent death should he be caught. He didn't want to live out his days in a cell. It backfired, since it only seemed to work on quirked people who had overused their quirk beyond a certain level. This had proven many times to be convenient, as he could safely ingest them in front of curious colleagues or during random searches as a multivitamin. It was also safe for most people, since they never truly awakened their quirks, though it would cause mild discomfort akin to an allergic reaction, but higher doses would kill instantly. Everything in these drawers had cost him everything in his life. Every chance of happiness he had with Ḥotaru or Bakugo could never truly happen because his mission came first. Ḥotaru could still be his victim someday, when the capacitor keeping the black hole at bay. At least that's the reason Midoriya thought he had stayed and helped him out all these years. Today's confession from his side cut deep, because once again he had misunderstood someone he loved again. He felt his doubts creep in as Bakugo's note confirmed Ḥotaru's words despite barely knowing him. When it came to people, he knew very little about the emotions of others. He could never be as expressive as Bakugo or Ḥotaru. He was only good with data and facts, but bad with people. He was 25, and the mission was the only thing in his life he knew he was good at, as he pocketed the tiny syringe and vial along with the balaclava instead of the ONI rebreather that was too high risk. He went to his car and plugged in the GPS, feeding in the coordinates for 𝗵𝗵𝗲's place of business along with the 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝐳 club Bakugo had summoned him to. He rolled his eyes and bashed his head into the steering wheel out of frustration as he saw they were not too far apart. However, he desperately needed a win, and his need for validation won over the risk of getting caught again by Bakugo like he did that night as he turned the key and sped off towards Shinjuku. Midoriya had been at the spot since 2 p.m. Anxiously counting down to 8 p.m. when he had to meet Bakugo, he was getting more nervous by the second, as he had less than 2 hours at this point to get in and investigate. He had clearly overestimated how active 𝗵𝗵𝗲 had been, especially after his associates went missing after Midoriya had gotten through with them. There wasn't anything left to find. Today, though, he wanted to make an example of 𝗵𝗵𝗲 for his hand in trafficking people. The steering wheel creaked as he rubbed his clenched palm on it, trying to keep them warm as he sipped from his cup, keeping an eye on the doors of the so-called spiritual healing center that posed as a tea house in the Shoin Zukuri tradition. Back in the days of Chisaki, this minka was a bustling hub for the trigger drug trade for ailing quirk users, but it had clearly been stripped down. The vivid wisteria trees that dotted along this street, famous for its outdoor gardens and serene tea ceremonies, was marred by this outlier with its wilted trees and shabby exterior. The minka's facade gold trimming, long faded and dull compared to its neighbors, gave it away as a place for shady business, but it attracted a different kind of tourist that wasn't noteworthy to the police and its strict rules on unprovoked search and seizures. Makio would have been alive today if they hadn't pumped him full of trigger that day. Midoriya saw he had less than 90 minutes to make it for the appointment with Bakugo. He didn't want to be late twice in the same day. Enough people were pissed off at him already. Finally, the lights went out in the minka and he saw 𝗵𝗵𝗲 leaving the building, locking up behind him. He seized the chance by getting out of the car, snapping thick leather gloves on, reaching into his pocket to discreetly open the small box with the dendrotoxin dart, retrieving it and clenching it in his open palm. He wasn't going to use the flute today because he wanted to throw his anger back out into the world somewhere. He caught up with him on the busy street and pricked him with the dart. The narrow 8mm needle felt like a mild prick as it shot several ccs of dendrotoxin into Shin, who hissed from the pain, turning around and looking around for the culprit in the thick crowd. As his heart rate shot up, the paralytic coursed through his veins, accelerating its effect in his hot blood. He couldn't speak as his eyes locked with Midoriya's, falling into him to the shock of onlookers. Midoriya nervously reached in and pulled out his detective badge, flashing it at the crowd. "I'm a detective with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. Please stand back as I take this man to the hospital." He spoke loudly, the quivering in his voice barely hidden as his hasty actions had put him in jeopardy once more. Thankfully, people backed off and decided to butt out since he was a cop, so they went back to their business as he dragged Shin with him, supporting the paralyzed man to the minka that was thankfully still 𝐂𝐴𝐵. Digging into his pockets, he found Shin's keys to the lock, setting him down as he opened the doors to the shabby place of business and helped him inside, locking the doors behind him as he found the main reception and started exploring the small office spaces inside. Each key in the ring opened mostly vacant rooms till he found the main office. Smiling at the trove of data and evidence that awaited him, hopefully seeing a few safes and several locked filing cabinets that would unravel this trafficking network, he went back to the reception and wheeled Shin back into this office, dragging the cabinets and desk with noisy scraping that felt like nails on a chalkboard in one small area with Shin right in the center. Shin's eyes darting all over the place only confirmed Midoriya's suspicions as he reached into his pocket and dosed him with the sanguine cocktail before turning on his shortwave radio in the other pocket and spoke the words he hoped would get it. "Response today despite the drama in the morning. Need a full extraction gate," he said as put the radio on the desk so Hotaru could zero in on it. As he did, a massive tear in the floor erupted. The same plasmid bubble in the mall was now enveloping half the room as the floor below turned to black. Izuku strapped his emergency air cylinder, biting down to release the valve as he slammed another one in Shin's mouth, forcing his paralyzed jaw to bite down on it with force from his hand as they were sucked through the floor along with everything to emerge in the clearing in the hangar. Midoriya gasped for air, seeing Shin's vomit dribbling out of his mouth. He leaned him forward and slapped his back, forcing the backed-up puke to release all over the desk, then slammed his face into the desk, letting him stew in his juice despite the extreme fatigue he felt from the massive disapparition, leaving him once again in agony. He looked over to see Hotaru with his hair cropped, body looking ragged, gasping desperately for air like a fish out of water. Big jumps like these were not only riskier to Midoriya but took their toll on Hotaru as well. Distance and objects traveling through the Empyrean realm needed his undivided focus and endless stamina to be disapparated at one end then reincorporated on the other. Midoriya knew deep down, after all the years of pulling out of the dark tunnel, Hotaru would always think of his safe retrieval to have mastered the technique, but he wasn't in his element today. Something was off. Midoriya rushed over, stumbling a little as he tried to find his footing, grabbing him by the shoulders, shaking Hotaru to see if this had not taken a toll he would hide from him again. Hotaru stank of 𝐒𝐵𝗃 and he had missed some strands of his dyed hair. Midoriya shed some tears as he cradled him in his arms and picked him up. He knew the conversation this morning was bad, but he couldn't imagine it had hurt him that deeply as he rested Hotaru against the table, easing him onto the stool as he pulled it under him. He was pouring a glass of water that he force-fed him despite muffled protests, then backed off as he saw him come out of his fugue state from the jump, looking daggers at Midoriya. "We have a guest. Need to get the cage up and running for him," Midoriya said as he pulled out his sanguine cocktail and put the vials onto the table, placing them carefully upright for a week's dose to keep Shin under control. Hotaru just nodded, refusing to look at Midoriya as he waved him off, which left Midoriya gritting his teeth as he grabbed him. Despite Hotaru being taller and much more thicker than him, Midoriya wasn't a pushover himself with all the years of physical training he had forced on himself to make up for his quirklessness on the job, dragging him to the paralyzed Shin as he cuffed him to the heavy file cabinet, feeding the chain through the soled handle, his hands dangling over his body helpless in his paralysis. Midoriya pulled out the antivenin to the dendrotoxin in case he ever got dosed or had to interrogate someone and jabbed the needle into the carotid. Shin's pupils were dancing from the painful sting as his heart pumped the antivenin as his mouth started moving slowly. Midoriya relieved as he looked to Hotaru and pointed fiercely at him. "This is 𝗵𝗵𝗄, former member of the 𝐒𝐻𝗵𝗄 Hasekai, and his quirk is to force people to tell the truth." He furiously scrawled a list of questions onto a notepad on the desk and pushed it towards him so he could read it. "You are going to ask me those questions and use your quirk for helping someone besides yourself for once," Midoriya said softly through gritted teeth, leaving the sanguinary injection on the table with the pen. "Or that headache will be nothing compared to the agony you're going to feel when I dose you again." "Mids," Hotaru started, but he was silenced by an aggressive palm from Midoriya, who looked at him with a determination in his eyes that pleaded for his silence for once in his life. He hesitantly complied, sitting on the stool as he nursed his hangover, letting Midoriya do what he wanted since he was too tired to interfere anyway. "Where are you going tonight?" Shin asked weakly. His quirk took over Midoriya, who started discharging his words without any filter. "To meet Bakugo in Shinjuku at Rurikarakusa." Hotaru crossed his arms, holding back his vomit from the hangover. "At 8 o'clock today to discuss only the case." "I don't know what he wants to discuss, but my mind is on my work only," Midoriya continued with his fists clenched as the confession quirk squeezed his brain painfully when he resisted telling the truth. always afraid it would hurt more than a lie or worse his silence. What are your true feelings for Katsuki Bakugo? Shin moved on to the next question. His voice croaked weakly as the first dose flagellated his brain the more he used his quirk. He is someone who I have admired all my life. Like everyone else above me I never could live up to. I crave his acknowledgement and much more because I can't know if I am really helping people unless Kaken confirms it. I love him with all my heart but I never think he will love me back as I hoped. Midoriya agitated to Hataru's annoyance. What would you do if Katsuki Bakugo made an advance and his feelings were genuine? Shin continued, the migraine in his head pounding away as he struggled to keep his consciousness. Midoriya's resistance to his quirk made the strain unbearable for both of them as Midoriya's own mind was being punished with the searing pain from resistance. I don't know, I never get a choice, I never get a say, I never have a plan when it comes to anyone loving me. I just know I just don't want to be alone again and I owe Katsuki a lot for setting me on this path, but I do not regret one day with you, Hataru. Since the day you grew distant I tried to end it all with this. Midoriya picked up the sanguine injection. Hataru's eyes flared with rage. The sparks started flying from them as the flywheel in his chest-mounted capacitor whirred up in torque. I couldn't even do that right and I stuck around hoping one day I'd be good enough for you. Knowing that you felt that you weren't good enough for me was the greatest shame in my life and I am sorry I made you feel that way. Midoriya spat out as his brain felt macerated from the resistance to the confession, speaking his hidden truth with immense anguish. I would have been dead that night, rotting away in a cell or killed with Bakugo burning my face off to hide my identity, but you stayed and I have only felt like a jinx that stole your future since then. Midoriya gasped, his throat feeling raspy as his vision went fuzzy for a moment from the extreme stress of spilling his guts under the duress of the quirk. Why are you really doing all this? Shin asked in a ragged voice. His throat dried out as his quirk was struggling with Midoriya. Even without the drug he never used it on such a level of resistance from his victims. On the dose of Midoriya's cocktail drug he was in hell. Every nerve on fire but carrying on since this was the last question on the list. Because I can't make a difference otherwise. I was born quirkless and I know what it's like to be left behind. I don't care how I save them. I just know it sucks to be alone and even if I have to kill them I don't want them to die unloved and hated like I will someday. Midoriya blurted with tears streaming, easing his resistance as he saw Hataru's mouth hanging open but the quirk compelled him to continue. I'm a selfish man and I'm doing this really to feel like a hero I know I'll never be but I want to help because no one else will. I wish I could stop and the only time I feel like turning myself in every day because I am too scared to off myself. I'm not a brave man. I'm a coward playing with fire hoping to die burning. Midoriya gasped as he ran out of breath and he felt the quirk released. Seeing Hataru's face, mixed with rage, disappointment and fear he felt rage, uncontrollable and searing like a hot poker. He yelled out as he grabbed the syringe and without thought or logic he just jabbed it crudely into Shin's neck and pressed the plunger. Seconds later he was brought out of his stupor as his brain normalized and both he and Hataru were brought out of their torpor from the blood-curdling screams of Shin's last minutes of life. The internal hemorrhaging caused him to sputter blood from his mouth, his eyes bleeding tears of blood as his brain was shutting down from the violent short circuits in every neuron at once. As he went still the air hung heavy and Midoriya leaned on the desk, tremors all over his body, his legs barely able to stand as the gait and Shin's quirk's fatigue were overtaking him. He couldn't bear to look at Hataru knowing his attempt to set things right definitely backfired horribly. On top of that he may have lost the chance to uncover the network of traffickers who were hunting the singularities like he was. Hoping the filing cabinets and safe along with the desk was supported by at this moment would yield clues its owner could have. Izuku Midoriya, Hataru said as he ambled over like a phantom, laying on top of him, his chin resting on the top of his skull as he sighed. What made you think I ever gave up on you? Hataru asked as Midoriya struggled to keep himself from falling onto the bloody desk, the corpse of his latest victim in front of them. He had turned Hataru into this desensitized mess of a person and his heart weighed heavy as he had given him every reason to leave today. Despite knowing he was walking on a doomed path, the warmth, his musk, even the stench of the 𝗃𝗧𝗍 were somehow comforting to him. I just can't think of any reason why you'd stay. Midoriya sobbed as he flicked his head up, his chin pointed to the recently deceased Shin. I'm a mechanic who loves fixing broken things. You just happen to be that broken Zuki. He whispered with exhaustion through those bloodshot eyes, leaving Izuku chuckling a little at his witty self returning a bit. I fixed a lot of junkers till they purr again but I never could fix myself. He tapped his chest. The capacitor hummed as he did. I fixed you a long time ago, Zuki. Why do you think Thunderclap wanted you so bad that I had to stalk him while he was stalking you that night? Midoriya sighed as he leaned into the desk. Hataru gently separated and he felt Midoriya embrace him. Hataru stroked Midoriya's hair and gave it a deep sniff. The tender moment was cut short by Midoriya's phone. Bakugo's call shocked him back to his senses as he saw the time was way past 8 o'clock. He hurriedly messaged him back, which was followed by dozens of violent slurs and aggressive messages to hurry up. He looked desperately at Hataru. You know I could just gate him here, make sure his ass is where his face should be," he brooded, trying to mix his humor with his insecurity. Midoriya shot a glance at him, pleading to take this up later, to which Hotaru just sighed and relented as he stepped back and Midoriya stepped into a clear area to create a safe distance. "I'll take care of things here, Mids. Don't forget to use a condom when he speaks," he chortled as Midoriya bit down on his breather's bite valve. Those green eyes flared with anger as he fell through the floor that sucked him in. Hotaru fell on his back, catching himself on the desk, feeling the warm blood on his palm, flicking his hand and wiping it off on his stained jumpsuit. "Lucky he didn't use you on me, big guy," he sighed as he went for the tools they used to clean up in these situations. Midoriya fought off the fatigue, a man possessed as Bakugo's calls on his phone went unanswered. Only the constant ping of messages keeping Midoriya conscious, able to push through the fatigue and the pain as he cursed himself. He felt panic as he hastily typed back replies and ran out of the building, locking it again to stop anyone from breaking and reporting the devastated office to the police, especially since the cameras on the street could place him there if they did investigate. Rushing to his car, he peeled off down the busy street, flipping the switch as he placed his siren on top of his car to make sure everyone on the road yielded as he plowed through the last miles to the 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐽𝐻𝐻𝐻. As he pulled up to the building, he was taken aback by the building that he knew only by pictures in the hero magazines, especially the saucy tabloids that would delve into the love lives and personal drama of heroes. His eyes widened as he knew this was a hero's exclusive club and common folk like him could never dream of entering it. It was also rumored to be a love hotel only for heroes, with many mentions of scandalous relations and taboo acts happening behind the hallowed doors of the gleaming Shiro or Joe-style castle, in front of it painted in a faint blue hue that glimmered like sapphire from the lights in the facade. A rash knock on his window brought him out of his thoughts as he saw a furious Bakugo, once again alone with no sign of his colleagues in tow. Midoriya was shocked that he was wearing just a vest and board shorts in his signature all black with a chain to pull the ensemble together, remembering their childhood as he rolled down the window in terror before Bakugo broke his hand or broke through it and pulled him out. "Where the fuck you been, shitty nerd?" Bakugo growled as he pulled Midoriya by his scruff. Midoriya trembled as he felt Bakugo's unreal strength lift him off. Though Midoriya was older and buffer than when he was a scrawny teen, he still felt small when it came to the raw power that Bakugo was somehow capable of unleashing when his blood boiled over like this. "Fine, I'll beat it out of you once we're inside." He threw a fox mask in at him, landing it in his lap. "Put that on, you'll be my guest tonight. They don't let trash like you in without it," he grumbled as he opened the door and pulled Midoriya out of the car and slammed it shut so hard it made the car jump on its suspension. Midoriya hastily put on the mask as a valet nearby took his car, handing him a small notched coin to use a token as he sped off to an underground spot, the car vanishing, and as he followed Bakugo through the doors into a vast atrium like the castles in Edo. The atrium fed into halls with many eyes, both machine and man, following Midoriya. He saw many people like himself wearing masks, but of different animals. The ones he did see wearing fox masks like him seemed to be feminine mostly. The detective in him told him it was no mistake that Bakugo was communicating through actions, not words, again as he led him down the winding maze-like corridors of this infinity castle. They entered in the Uku, which were the inner chambers back in the shogunate days, the place where the concubines and the queen used to reside with the shogun himself, ready to serve any and all needs of the lord of the land himself. Bakugo slid open a door to a washitsu and beckoned Midoriya through it hastily, keeping a watch over prying eyes. The Uku seemed to be the only place that had no bugs or cameras. It made sense. If you were a hero, you were always being followed or spied on by anyone, paparazzi, police, HPSC, or villains. Midoriya took off the mask as he entered the room, feeling the sweat drip down his face as he was anxious, finding the low seating in the room that had a massive futon for couples in it. His worst fears were being played out in his head, but at the same time his desires were overtaking him as well. Sadly for both, Bakugo just pulled up a Kyosoku armrest and leaned on it a few feet from Midoriya. He was disappointed but relieved at the same time, hoping this was all business since Bakugo had never really been a source of pleasure anywhere but his wildest fantasy. "I know your secret, Deku," Bakugo said through gnashed teeth, "the real reason you're late." He threw a pillow at Midoriya that landed square on his face as Bakugo continued barking at him, lunging on top of him. The sparks from his hand sparkled menacingly, crackling like a fire. "Don't you dare think of lying to me, Deku," he growled as Midoriya tried hard to collect his thoughts, thinking somehow Bakugo might have remembered that night, or he may have seen the cameras in the area and put two and two together with Shin. Bakugo suddenly got up and threw him back on the tatami floor. "You stink of sake and puke, shitty nerd," Bakugo grumbled as he sat back on the elbow rest. "You shouldn't be chasing guys in some shitty bar, you sweaty nerd. If liquor is the only way to get you to spill your guts, I should have brought my old hag's specialty," he lamented as Midoriya got back up dazed, relieved that Bakugo might be upset over his personal life rather than remembering he was a serial killer. I'm sorry, Cat. He paused as 𝗵𝘃𝐲 glared at him. Kaken, I didn't mean to get late. It's just been tough, you know. My line of work, being quirkless and… Midoriya started, but he felt 𝗵𝘃𝐲's thin patience wearing out faster than expected. We're not in complete privacy here, so no real names and shit, Deku. I don't want to hear excuses. I want your head out of your ass and slapping cuffs on this fucking killer. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 barked. He's not gonna wait around while you get drunk and go blowing drunks under the table, you fucking fruitcake, and neither am I. He gnashed his teeth, flashing that baleful stare as Midoriya had seen many times when he used to bully him. Kaken, why do you want K so badly? Midoriya asked cautiously, bracing himself for the very violent impending repercussion. I keep seeing the same fucked up dream these days, you shitty nerd. He growled, crossing his arms, gnashing his teeth as Midoriya felt he was getting closer to the real reason for all this seclusion. It's the same fucking thing over and over, like I'm trying to remember something. Sometimes it's raining and I catch him. Sometimes I rip off his fucking mask and I see your quirkless ass behind it. Sometimes I just go mad thinking of just offing myself because I drove you to become some psycho kid killer. He growled as he hung his head shamefully, an emotion Midoriya had never seen his confident friend ever express. I went to Island for a brain scan and they say some shit messed up my head. I had lots of therapy, found out things about myself I didn't like. Hell, I thought I was K for a moment and the dreams were me remembering that shit. Took hours and days of camera footage to prove to myself I was busy bleeding somewhere or making someone bleed when the murders happened, 𝗵𝘃𝐲 said in a calm voice that sent chills down Midoriya's spine. Knowing the memories could resurface if 𝗵𝘃𝐲 had pushed hard enough. Kaken, what did you find out? Maybe I can help, Midoriya said, reaching his hand out before it was slapped away by 𝗵𝘃𝐲 suddenly. Some drops of nitro burst on his skin, leaving Midoriya in some pain as the mini explosions pricked his skin like hot oil. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 leapt at him suddenly, looking at the injuries with a tenderness while assessing the damage which he never showed before flinging his hand away and returning to the distance between them. Midoriya's suspicions growing with what Hotaru had been hinting all along. Was he really this blind to 𝗵𝘃𝐲 even though they had been lifelong friends, as he felt 𝗵𝘃𝐲's hungry gaze upon him like a wolf trying to stay vegan? Why do you hate me, Kaken? Midoriya asked, baiting him on purpose. He had to know if Hotaru was right and how oblivious he is to 𝗵𝘃𝐲. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 just glared at him. Why the fuck do you think that, you soft, plain-faced, freckled fuck? Just cause I show you some tough love and don't coddle you doesn't mean I hate you. I literally chased away every cop I got partnered with till I finally got you shit back. Midoriya felt that barb, not because it was 𝗵𝘃𝐲 being mean, but because this was 𝗵𝘃𝐲 when he was hiding something and trying to deflect your attention from it. Please, Kaken, I just need to know, when you found out about me, did you hate me for being .. me? He pleaded. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 rolled his eyes and came close to him and grabbed him hard by the ear. Listen once, cause I am not gonna repeat myself, you drama queen. I called you here so you can tell me what the fuck is eating your ass. You're the best detective I know, and suddenly one day you leave me without a partner and don't talk to me for years on top of that. I don't want to work with you if you keep looking down on me, you quirkless bitch. He blared into Izuku's ear so loud the ringing after that was deafening. Midoriya took a few minutes to recover as he saw 𝗵𝘃𝐲 making tea. Another thing he never expected from 𝗵𝘃𝐲, who always presented himself as someone who would squeeze a rock easily as a sponge to drink water from it. Don't spill a fucking drop, you smelly swine. He handed Izuku a cup that was warm, 𝗵𝘃𝐲 taking the hot one in his hands and sipping from the floral cup. Midoriya looked into his as he pondered over it. How would this end? When would 𝗵𝘃𝐲 eventually find out, with Midoriya being with him on this case, that he is K? There were so many ways in his head that could lead him to that conclusion, even if he stopped searching for the singularity. K's murders abruptly stopping, then resuming after 𝗵𝘃𝐲 gives up. The way Midoriya smells like today, his sleep pattern, his guilt, and how bad he was at hiding things from 𝗵𝘃𝐲, and learning that 𝗵𝘃𝐲 had been stalking him that night, not because he suspected he was the killer, but because he wanted to talk to him alone back then but found something else out. He had to know right now. Kaken, what were you trying to tell me all those nights you were stalking me off duty? Midoriya asked inquisitively, knowing the response he was looking for as he let the detective in him take over. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 set his cup down slowly and covered it with the saucer to keep it warm. Waiting for you to ask me the million-dollar question. He got up and sat next to Midoriya. Did you stop being my partner because you thought I was trying to cross the line? Did you run again from me because you're a coward afraid to hurt me? Why does a quirkless nerd like you look down on me? 𝗵𝘃𝐲 spoke dolefully, poking Midoriya in the chest with each question, keeping his eyes locked on him. The infamous Kaken's stare of truth that was only between them as Midoriya gulped. I just had a mental break, that's all. I never meant to hurt you, but it just happened, and I didn't want your hero ranking to drop because I couldn't solve cases for you. I looked up to you like an idol, and every day I thought of giving up I would remember you kicking my ass and forcing me to do better when I lost my nerve. Midoriya replied apprehensively. A calm 𝗵𝘃𝐲 was much more dangerous and unpredictable than an angry one. He had no idea how to beat him when he was in the eye of the storm. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 showed me you caught more criminals than the whole department while you were chained to that desk liar. He poked Midoriya's chest and leaned in. Stop trying to spare my feelings. I know you hated every minute being chained to your childhood bully, so you saying I caused your little mental episode. He leered into Midoriya's eyes. His victim knew full well he couldn't hide anything. Well, you sort of did, Kaken. Midoriya said truthfully, since 𝗵𝘃𝗀 nearly killed him on that night, helping him to pass Kaken's stare down. I just got intimidated. I didn't know if I measured up or I could keep up with you. Also, Midoriya reached out, touching 𝗵𝘃𝗀's chest, to which he pulled back. I don't know how you really feel about me, Kaken, and it's been tearing me up inside. Midoriya finally yelled out, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 stopping immediately, looking back at him. Those red eyes narrowed and focused on him. Funny, that's exactly what my shrink said about you, so did 10 others after him. They couldn't find a word for how I feel about you, and I never expected you to ever tell me the truth, knowing what a coward you are, serving me sugar-coated lies to protect me. He growled resentfully, with Midoriya shrinking back at the mental gut punch. It's just a thing they keep linking back to my dreams. I just can't figure who you are to me, and I'm taking the first steps to get better cause I stirred up a lot of shit since we were kid. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 sighed as he held out his hand. This is the only time I am apologizing, and not cause the doc said to. He stared fiercely at Midoriya, who shook it tentatively before being pulled in for a kiss against his will at first, but 𝗵𝘃𝗀 just pushed himself on top of him, pinning him down to Midoriya's stupefaction as he gave in and kissed him back. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 pulled off him after a few minutes, shaking his head. This is what you do. He growled as he got back up, sighing in frustration. I'm the number 3 hero of this fucking country. I am fucking Katsuki 𝗵𝘃𝗀. I always had options besides you, shitty Deku. He punched the tatami mat, with Midoriya reaching out but held back, letting 𝗵𝘃𝗀 take out his rage on the mat rather than him. I felt sorry for you, Deku. Never thought you felt sorry for me, always thinking I needed saving. I needed help. I needed your shitty quirkless ass holding me back. He grunted as he kept punching the tatami floor, scraping his knuckles from the abrasive texture. Shitty Deku, you didn't need a quirk. You just needed pity to lure me in, till I couldn't survive being apart from you. I turned down bigger contracts, team-ups, foreign tours, all because I just couldn't fucking leave you behind. Even when you got to be a cop, I had to be there in case some shitty villain took your self-righteous ass out like that slime nearly did. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 whined as he looked at the flecks of blood on the tatami mat, cleaning his bleeding knuckles with the handkerchief in the tea tray, looking back at Midoriya, who was swept away by this sudden urge of emotion. I've had so many long years, Izuku, to think of my feelings and why I can't get you out of my head. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 grinned. Turns out you always held me in the palm of your hand, dancing to a tune only you fucking knew. He pinched the knot, tying the handkerchief to his hand as he reached forward. Take your time before you say yes to me, Deku. I won't be looked down on, and I sure as hell am not gonna lose to some fucking barfly who drank you under the table. He flicked his chin as he sat down to drink his tea again. Midoriya stared down at his lukewarm cup, following suit, knowing better than to answer right now while tempers and emotions were high. He thought he wanted Hotaru, certain that 𝗵𝘃𝗀 would never accept him, so he had to take a chance with 𝗵𝘃𝗀 now that he knew all of this. He had to know once and for all if 𝗵𝘃𝗀 would survive the trial by fire like Hotaru did all these years with him as he lay the cup down. Kaken, hi. He got on his knees in the 𝗧𝗍𝗪 position like courtiers did back when castles like these had the tradition for a petitioner to be heard. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 nodded, humoring him. I have been tracking a network of quirk traffickers for these last few years on my own, without backup or a warrant. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 set his cup down, the tinkling of the porcelain contrasting the silence that fell in the room. I have been working cold cases behind everyone's back to track children who reach singularity and try to save them before it's too late. He clenched his fists as he heard the sparks flying from 𝗵𝘃𝗀's free hand. Midoriya kept his head low as he had to know today, otherwise he couldn't live with himself. Your dreams are real, Kaken, every single detail. Midoriya bowed as he submitted for his execution. Before I say it, I just want to know what you were going to do to me that night when you found out I was K. His forehead dug into the tatami floor, the interlaced weaving cutting into the skin as he waited. 𝗵𝘃𝗀's sparking got louder as he was waiting for the coming blow. I will turn myself in and confess to everything tonight to Tsukachi-san, but please let me know what you were going to do that night when you found out. Midoriya sobbed as he dug his palms into the tatami mat. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 got up and kicked him in the gut till he rolled over on his side. As he was exposed, he was thrown across the room onto the futon, where 𝗵𝘃𝗀 got on top of him, landing blow after blow on his face, crying out fairly as he lost himself to his rage. Midoriya tried to recede into an unconscious state, but the sting of each punch dug in, jolting him back to consciousness as he fell in and out like a yo-yo. As he lay there bleeding, breathing with some difficulty, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 stopped his assault and just lay on top of him, compressing his body against his and squalled like a wounded animal, gently cradling Midoriya's head in his bleeding hand. You shitty Deku. I always save you in the dream. You're worthless, murdering ass, self-righteous, selfish fucking ass. Stop looking down on me, you goddamn piece of shit. Stop trying to be a hero alone or you're gonna get killed if you don't fucking stay behind me. From now on you just fucking listen to me, got it? He howled as he grabbed Midoriya's hair and squeezed himself tightly against him. Midoriya wanted to respond, but his cheeks were too swollen and bruised. The pain was searing throughout his body as he was losing consciousness. The last thing he heard was Bakugo yelling his name over and over. Not Deku or Nerd, but Izuku, as he lost himself to the deep sleep he had been craving for so long. His burden finally lifted as he had confessed. Midoriya woke up at 6 a.m., looking around the Spartan bedchamber with only a side table. He felt the comfort of the minimalism that went into its design as he started his morning routine, heading into the bathroom for the usual shower, shit, then shave. He missed having his phone, his car, and the mini apartment he would only crash in. Come to think of it, his old life felt like prison with extra steps, except he had only followed his routine to the letter, taking his time since there was no more office, no more desk work, no more disapproving looks, no one to save. It had been several days. His only distractions came from the TV, which never had any good news. Every disaster only threatening to pull him back into that state of anxiety that compelled him to run into fires instead of from them. He was journaling for the first time in years, not writing up kill lists or piecing together breadcrumbs from cold cases. The isolation was somehow refreshing when he was forced into it. He had been getting away with it for the last decade. He was bound to end up like this, but somehow he yearned for a prison cell so he could have some company. He had not felt, seen, smelled anyone but himself, and he was being overwhelmed with a feeling of self-disgust as he was wearing fresh shorts and shirts every day. Hotter would be besides himself with worry, even if it had been almost a week, if he didn't report in. Midoriya knew that he would be relentless in finding him, and a guy with a black hole for a heart would not be a good matchup for his captor Bakugo. He had wondered why Bakugo had put him in here, why he was being fed and clothed but confined. Both of their mutual confessions must have hit hard, but Midoriya just welcomed a quick death at this point. Some days darker than most, as the isolation like an unwelcome guest had worn out its welcome, and he was desperately looking for an escape. It didn't matter if it came from a sharp object or from that door finally opening. He crossed out the set on the calendar, wondering how Tsukachi must have found out about him. The shame the news would bring on the department to have had a serial killer under their noses for so long. The media would crucify everyone, including his mentor, who would lose his pension, position, and popularity. But to Midoriya, he would lose the most valuable thing in his life, Tsukachi's faith in him. The news kept tormenting him as he saw tragic accidents and incidents, but the detective in him knew the streets and addresses from the cold cases. Those were singularities, and he was going nowhere, resigned to be at the mercy of Bakugo, who would not engage with him even when he was slipping food and clothes under the sod of the door. He tried to reach out and managed to brush the skin on his hands when he was slipping his meal in yesterday, but it was retracted immediately by the man he had confessed to. Midoriya did not take the idea that he was some caged predator that would take off your limbs if you poked his cage lightly, as he was considering his many exit strategies from the room, and none of them included him leaving the room as he saw release from this dehumanizing torment as he went to sleep once more, shutting off the TV that showed hundreds dead. Each suspected quirk rushed through Midoriya's mind as the fear of Katsuma and other kids searching for him only fed them many nightmares. How would they react if they saw him on the news in prison? Would Hotaru break him out? Would the kids join him? Would they all be on the lam, changing identities like their clothes to keep a step ahead of the authorities nipping at their heels? What Midoriya wouldn't give right now for just a pencil he could shove into his brain to shut it down. He was sick of his actions, every choice only hurting someone he loved, whether he meant to or not, as he let his thoughts drain him, taking him into a deep slumber where only his nightmares waited to consume him, swallowing him whole, leaving him to be painfully and slowly digested ad infinitum every night. Izuku, fucking wake up already. Bakugo barked, his face inches from him. Midoriya froze, silently listening for a siren, Tsukachi's footstep, the media. None of those registered in his periphery, so he was perplexed what Bakugo was doing here alone, inches from a killer. I need to get it. He looked at Midoriya's hands, rubbing the palms gently. You're not evil incarnate. You're the softest asshole I know, so I need to know why you did these things. Bakugo's red eyes dropped their guard. Bakugo was in his signature dynamite overcoat, fully battle-clad. Midoriya withdrew reluctantly, looking away. Why am I here, Kaken? Midoriya asked one question that asked so many while being deceptively simple. Bakugo's brow furrowed as he considered the question's depth and weight, taking the time to give an answer. 'Cause I need to know what the right decision in all this is. He growled with a simple answer. You're talking to the most villainous hero. I'd be number one if I kissed their asses, but you know I've always made my own rules. Bakugo smacked Midoriya upside the head as he bent down and put all of Midoriya's belongings in front of him. Things from his desk at work, even from the false bottom. He looked at Bakugo in horror as he held his shortwave radio in his hand. Midoriya shook his head furiously, trying to grab it from him before he turned it on. Calm down, nerd. Just making sure you don't call in backup. he snarled as he desperately held Midoriya down, sending the box to the floor, its contents rolling across it as Bakugo gained leverage over him. The radio falling to the floor. His heart stopped as he heard the static crackle to life for a minute as the impact with the floor had turned it on for a second, enough for a ping to go out. He grabbed Bakugo with all his strength and pulled him close. "Run 𝐂𝐸𝐳𝐶HAN," he begged. Bakugo shook his head, teeth grit to keep him steady as the plasma built around them. The energy convalesced from the ether as he took a deep breath and sealed his lips around Bakugo's, pumping in air to keep both of their lungs pressurized as the floor gave away and the bed was sucked through the floor as Hataru's quirk had zeroed in on their location and he was trying to make sure Bakugo's lungs didn't burst in the vacuum they were about to go through. Midoriya immediately disconnected the kiss once he felt the crisp air of the hangar enter his nostrils. His lungs were on fire as he struggled to breathe, gasping sharply as Bakugo retched from the vertigo and discombobulation of having been disapparated and reincorporated through a near vacuum, falling off Midoriya onto the floor where he let out a stream of vomit as his organs were burning from the inside out as though he was kicked in the gut by Hataru who towered over them. "Get the fuck away from him," he roared as his eyes radiated pure black sparks that spewed out from his pupils. The dark electric currents arced all over his body like a circuit, sinking into the ground as he picked up Bakugo by the scruff. Midoriya yelled out despite his burning lungs, but the sudden explosion and sharp cracks of galvanizing dark energy threw him off the bed as the titans clashed violently, sending blows and attacks that punched holes in the walls and the contored ceiling. Midoriya's panic rose as each thundering blow and explosive volley shook him to the bone. The vibration was deafening and numbing as he knew a singularity was imminent. Bakugo had skill and control with experience, but Hataru's raw power closed that gap, keeping him on the defensive as Midoriya crawled towards the toolbox, keeping his head low to avoid the explosive exchanges as he was searching for the one thing to end this as he opened the drawer and pulled out the hand. His hands shook as he tapped into the nihilism and self-hate that had been building up over the last few days. He stood up and yelled, several volleys and arcs missing him narrowly as he stood there stubbornly, the gun aimed at his chest. He didn't think. He didn't consider anything except pulling the trigger and ending this whole mess on his terms. Bakugo and Hataru looked at him in horror as he rushed towards him. Time had slowed down for Midoriya as the hammer of the gun clicked and the bang from the shot echoed in the hangar as he felt his ribs break and his heart stopped. The last thing he heard was from Hataru, "Eri, get in here now," as he just checked out from the exhaustion. Not wanting the last thing he saw to be Bakugo or Hataru mourning him, just darkness as he fell back into the numbing void. Midoriya woke up in Hataru's bed, the single mattress lumpy with the springs creaking as he left it back in his dorm and their apartment. He had been in it many times, missing the intimacy they used to share back in their academy days all the way till that night as those times had long passed. He thought this was hell, was his punishment to spend eternity in yearning, thinking to himself of the irony of ending his own existence. His senses returned as he saw Eri with her horn having shrunk. The realization dawned on him as he checked his wound, seeing the blood in the t-shirt with the massive tear from the heat of the point-blank bullet, tracing the phantom injury, not a rib out of place or a tear in his heart. The physical damage had been undone, but he knew from the size of her horn that she had been busy as he got up. His body felt restored by years instead of the few hours he needed as he looked graciously at her. She was barely 14, but she acted much more mature for her age despite her days of being the Yakuza's guinea pig day in and out till Night Eye's team liberated her and helped her get a handle on her abilities. He was grateful she volunteered here while preparing for a future as a hero. She would liven the spirits of the kids at the farm who looked up to their big sis, hoping against hope one day those kids can go on to live normal lives and some can be heroes like Eri would one day be. "You gave us quite the scare there, Izuku-kun." Eri smiled as she handed him a glass of water that the parched Midoriya took as a courtesy, holding it in his hands. "I'm supposed to be dead, Eri. Not even your quirk can fix that." Eri raised her brow and shook her head. "Hataru-sen keeps that thing full of blanks, Izuku-kun. It did break the skin and your ribs, but it only grazed your heart, so you hung in there for a while so I could fix you up." Midoriya looked at her, about to open his mouth. "Those two have a truce right now. That's why I'm here, since we don't want an encore." She sighed as she sat down next to him. "Shio-sen is pretty hard on me and I can see why." She shed a tear as she laid her head on his shoulder. "It's not easy to save people who don't want to save themselves." Midoriya looked at her, stroking her hair as he sighed. "Kaken always used to complain about her when he was in UA. You'll save more people than I ever will, Eri, the right way. I just feel lost the reason to live. I see 2 waiting for you outside and 52 in the farm behind us, Izuku-kun." She retorted genially. "Accept the responsibility for your actions, Izuku-kun. You can't just give up like everyone has for them. I won't lie to Katsuma again for you," she continued with a perturbed note in her voice. Midoriya sunk his head and stared at the water in his hands. Now clear as he had stopped shaking, he saw himself at least 5 years younger from Eri's handiwork, looking back disappointed in him. "How are Hataru and Kaken?" I can fix anything except broken hearts and bruised egos, Eri said dismissively, shrugging her shoulders. I'm 14, but even I know that you boys have to figure these things out on your own. There's just no healing some people until they let you. She patted his back and grinned at him. I think you need to talk to those two before I have to fix this hangar again. I have to head back now before Chiyo-sen raises the alarms at UA looking for me. She kissed him on the cheek as he opened the door. Midoriya stared at his reflection as he heard the sounds of crackling lightning. The air around him thickened with the static that came as soon as it had gone. He had been through it enough to know the comfort of that sound that had bailed him out so many times. Allowing him to pull this off for so long without getting caught as he swallowed all the water, knowing he would be parched after he was done explaining all this. As he opened the door, he saw Bakugo was chained to a chair, his hands clasped behind him, separated and submerged in buckets of water. Hotaru standing guard as they both looked his way. Midoriya was left petrified by the sight. Before you say anything, this was all his idea. Hotaru pointed at Bakugo, who grinned back. Eri had seemed to pull out all the stops today as they both looked like they were 20 again. I just wanted to shut him up, Deck. Bakugo started as Hotaru punched him in the gut, leering at Midoriya. He isn't useless, you asshole. Hotaru winced as he shook his hand from the pain, the freshly healed knuckles now bruised, shaking his head at Midoriya as he took a seat himself and kicked a stool near Izuku. Now this asshole knows about you, so how do we handle it, Mids? Hotaru cracked his knuckles and tenderly massaged them with his fingers as he watched Bakugo for any signs of trouble. The number 3 hero being eerily silent in all this. Katsuki, I want to give myself up, but I want you to leave everyone else out of it. They went along with me and I will cooperate long as you don't bring them up, Midoriya offered, to which Bakugo's face turned red. His rage bubbled and frothed from his mouth as he spat out his next words. Fuck no. You think I kept you in my fucking apartment just so I can throw you to the mutts? I know you had your reasons to, Izuku. I want to know them first before I make up my mind. He growled as he gnashed his teeth, leering at Hotaru. So that means you'll still arrest Mids? He asked leisurely, cracking his bruised knuckles, suppressing the wince of pain. I got my own shitty rules just like he does. I know he's no villain. Bakugo barked. Oh, but he's killed kids, men, been involved in mass murder sprees. Thunderclap. Sounds pretty villainous to me, hero. Hotaru shot back at him, spitting at each word passionately. Listen up, fucko. I had him at my mercy for a fucking week. Why didn't I turn him in? Use that brain, or did all that lightning short out your brain, himbo? Bakugo snarled at Hotaru, snapping back at him. There's only one thing me and Thundercunt here agree on, Mids. Hotaru turned to Midoriya, ignoring Bakugo's gawking behind him. We aren't letting you turn yourself in. You want out. I don't want to see you in prison. Dunno about Thundercunt back there. Fuck off, extra. You fucking NPC, go die. He knows I don't want him to go to jail either. I just gotta make sure I can live with it. He growled behind him. Hotaru got up and was about to land another blow before Midoriya stood up, appending the stool with a loud clang. Kaken, please, tell me what you need me to do. Show me what you do. Bakugo spoke coldly. I want to see it all from start to finish. No more hiding it from me, Midoriya. Treat me like a part. He was interrupted as Hotaru smashed his knee into Bakugo, sending the chair over the edge with him landing on the floor sideways. You had 10 years and you were too busy playing the hero. Don't you dare call him your partner when you haven't paid the price. He tapped the crackling capacitor on his chest as he walked away to cool off, stopping near Midoriya. Keep your radio on. If it so much as goes dark for a hot second, Midi, I'm going to come in black hole blazing, he said as he shoved the new portable shortwave in Midoriya's hand and before going back into his room, slamming the room behind him. Midoriya went over to Bakugo and untied him. The knots weren't tightened by Hotaru enough, as though he were hoping for a rematch, which left Midoriya reeling from how much both of them were so similar yet so polarized, like the two ends on the same magnet. Kaken, you have to promise whatever happens, they're safe, Midoriya pleaded as Bakugo looked away dejected. Yay, sure. Bakugo snapped back as he got to his feet, feeling his abdomen for bruises as it felt sore. Boy there has a point. Show me everything, Izuku. He grumbled. If I'm going to be your partner in this, I need to know what I'm jumping into. If you don't like what you see, Midoriya rasped in a low voice, feeling a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then stay behind me and fucking listen to me. I'll figure shit out. Bakugo growled as he rubbed twinged from the soreness in his abdomen. Now show me everything. He grunted through his gnashed teeth. He squeezed Midoriya's shoulder. I mean everything. He repeated in that stoic tone, both a threat and a plea, as Midoriya took him to his work area on the other side of the hangar, filled with murder boards and info trees with red threads that looked like the web he was caught in for nearly a decade. Hotaru had been distant and despondent lately with Bakugo in their base for the last few days. It was disturbing for him to see how easily a top-ranking hero could abuse their power to suit the situation, with Bakugo barking over his phone and it would get done. Though he had come from a family with immense privilege, he cast it off to tread his own path, as he hadn't been out of the base for many reasons. The black hole in his heart always caused problems and needed the open spaces. He was always frustrated with himself that he couldn't be out in the field, forced to wait in the wings as he would have to wait for Midoriya's pings from his shortwave to take action. Today's excursion was different. Bakugo was calling the shots, trying to do things his way. All Hotaru knew was if there was ever a way to end things differently, Midoriya would not have been tormented for the last 10 years. The capacitor on his chest was a sordid reminder that not all the singularities could be saved, including him someday, and that uncertain future held him back from really living for himself. He chose to live through Midoriya to find some purpose for himself. He was done with tinkering and tweaking around in the massive hangar. It was the first thing he had bought, with the inheritance left to him as the final survivor for his family. It felt like blood money he took against his pride, because he swore he would find his way into the world without his dad, but love makes a prisoner of us all, and he needed cash while Midoriya needed a base. Like many times in his life, he was still paying the price as he went over to the farm. Eri had not checked back like she was supposed to, so he went in to confirm all was well as he chambered a few rounds just in case in his dart gun. A contingency that he would find better to not need than to be left wanting when the situation called for it. Most of the kids at the farm had come into their teens now and pitched in. The labor and chores around the crops did them good, allowing them to use their quirks openly away from prying eyes. He tucked the dart gun in a holster that hung on his hips, under a flap in his mechanic one-piece suit, simple, flexible, and durable. Everything he tried to be as he ran his hands through his vivid green-dyed hair. Returning to a speckle of his former self as he had to keep a smile on for the kids and show them all was well. Izuku rarely visited the farm, knowing he couldn't get attached when cases like Makio's had happened. Not all kids were happy being cooped up, and he knew that as he walked with his toolbox in one hand to the golden field. His thoughts kept him company as he saw the teens who came here as toddlers were roaming the fields. Their teamwork had grown under Eri, who was grooming some to apply for the upcoming UA courses for rural students, and they were anxious to be like their big sis who knew more than anyone the existential fence they sat on. How easily they were one mistake away from oblivion as he waved at a group who were plucking weeds, waving at him with their hands sharpened in various ways, some metallic, some organic hardening. They pulled double duty as sentries and scouts, alerting him with the same shortwave that Midoriya would carry, knowing Big Brother was in his hangar. His quirk had distanced him from human intimacy for a long time. He had only recently learned to contain it thanks to Eri always rewinding the black hole to a point where it was controllable. He felt a pang of guilt that Midoriya would have to dose him in the past when control seemed a far-off dream that had shattered any chance he had at normalcy with him. Not that helping Midoriya was normal by any means, but the heart wants what it wants, and he knew he didn't want him out of his life at any point, even if it meant he had to keep his distance. He knocked on the door of the farmhouse. Katsuma had regained some of his muscle tone since the month he returned. His quirk always did drain his body too much, and he had to be mindful. As Hotaru's kindred spirit, he understood the struggle, that it was something only manageable because Eri could reverse the worst side effects in most of the kit. "Morning, Katsu. Where's your big sis?" Hotaru set the toolbox down. Katsuma looked at him dejected as he walked past him. "She's in the hospice. Rin didn't want to be alone." He sighed as he kicked a stone down the path, walking forward and repeating the motion. Hotaru knew some of the kids were terminal, but Rin was special since she was one of the trigger kids Midoriya barely saved on time. Everyone knew she had months to live with all the experiments, but still, knowing the day came felt like the brightest candle in the home was going to be extinguished hung heavy as he picked up the toolbox and headed around the house to a door in the ground. A bomb shelter made since the old wars for the family that used to live here. He opened the double doors and made his way down, careful to close them back as he secured them before proceeding down the passage illuminated by the cracks of sunlight that bled through the gaps in the wooden door. Clutching his tools, he knew something was going to break in the hospice, and he never had a tool for that particular part, the human heart. He came upon Eri, whose horn had shrunk down to a nub, having exhausted so much of her energy. Everyone knew it could reverse time and reject reality itself, but no one knew exactly where the energy was coming from, so even Chio had to give her breaks to recover. She looked back and smiled at Hotaru as a sickly girl was in the bed. Her body was skeletal, no meat on the bones, with dozens of tubes fed into her, the ventilator and dialysis machines keeping her going. This wasn't living, not any shot, and despite Eri having pushed herself, she couldn't undo the ravages her quirk had put on Rin's body. Just like Eri, Rin had the unfortunate luck to have been picked up by the remnants of the Shy Hasekai, who were desperately trying to revive the trigger trade that lined their pockets back in the day. Her blood factor quirk allowed her to produce more refined triggers, so she was used as a human refinery to push out a richer potency without regard for her life as a human being. She had the unfortunate awakening that filled the air with the potent trigger, and unfortunately it was in the entertainment district where people lost themselves and their quirks to a madness the police could not trace back to her. Midoriya only survived because he was quirkless. Had Eri or Hataru been with him that day, they would have succumbed as well, like the rest of her victims that fell in the hundreds, dying from the overdose of trigger or being consumed by their empowered quirks, whichever came first. This came with the bonus of having killed her captors and everyone in the building, which made Midoriya's job a whole lot easy since the cops did not know where to look. But Midoriya always had a gut instinct that people always underestimated. He always found the lost ones because he had been lost himself. Born helpless as they were, till one day he decided he wouldn't. That is what made Hataru keep going as he sat down and got busy checking the old machines, wishing they could get some of the newer models, but his quirk didn't play well with the quantum computers in them due to the dark energy his quirk produced, so they had to rely on good old analog like the space agencies did, which was built to last. At least the equipment was effective and easy to fix, and he liked it that way as he turned his back and gave Eri and Rin their silent goodbye. The humming and hissing of the ventilator far from comforting. Deep within his heart, Hataru wished he could give her the merciful passing that Midoriya did, but Eri ran the show here, and despite knowing that it would be a peaceful passing, objected because she wanted them to experience life till the last second possible. Like Midoriya, she had her own principles from her suffering, and of course she survived years of darkness by clinging to hope until the day she was liberated. So he couldn't argue with her despite how he felt Rin deserved a peaceful death instead of dozens of tubes and machines keeping her barely alive. The only saving grace was that Eri had authorized the use of their signature cocktail when it posed a risk to the other children, a compromise that was hard won but not an easy one to come to. Rin could barely keep her eyes open, but she kept that weak smile on as Eri didn't want to move, clutching the syringe she knew she would have to use if the quirk awakened, ready to use at a moment's notice. They heard the door open and a set of clunking steps trundling downstairs. Hataru got pissed off not hearing the doors being closed behind them, but never mind. Someone had come to relieve Eri from her grim vigil, to Hataru's relief, as the life signs were stable. Hoping Rin would still be here a few more days so Eri can see her again. Katsuma came in the door to Hataru's disapproval. "Katsu, we've talked about this. You're too young for hospice duties." He put his foot down and turned the young boy around, but he resisted. "Fuck that. I'm 15. Everyone is out there helping out while you keep me locked up in that fucking house since." "Makio." Hataru paused as he heard this, gently squeezing his shoulder. "Katsuma, you know your quirk can't be contained by your body. Don't exert yourself." Hataru spoke softly, leaning down. "You can jump far, kiddo, but your body gets drained out too fast. Take it from one teleporter to another, okay? You leave a bit of your body behind with each jump, and Eri-chan can't keep bringing those parts back, you know." Katsuma slapped his hand away. "We both know that's not the reason I'm going to end up in this bed someday. I'm not a kid anymore, and I know what I did to those people." Hataru slapped him on the face gently and waved his index finger side to side. "If I sneeze, I can turn Midoriya inside out. It just takes 1 second with us. You were a kid and you got a handle on it without any help." He tapped the worrying capacitor on his heart. "Eri-chan, please take my application to UA. I have to make things right," Katsuma pleaded, talking over Hataru to his disapproval. Eri looked over with a weak smile and nodded, eliciting a raised eyebrow from Hataru, who seized his chance. "Tell you what, keep Rin company." He stuck the needle into the tube and sat Katsuma down next to it. "If you smell trigger or feel tingly, the first thing you do is," Hataru motioned the plunger being pushed down. Katsuma nodded as Eri took out a small chip, the type that UA used for privileged communication. "Be sure to talk to Rin about everything you're gonna do when you go to UA, okay, champ?" He ruffled that red hair, the static from his palm making it stand on end. "I gotta take Eri-chan back before her friends at UA start looking for her." Hataru flicked his finger at his forehead in their little salute. Katsuma, being one of the more regular kids he interacted with, seeing a lot of himself in him, sharing a similar quirk and the same fears that came from its awakening, that put his gate to shame. "UA has a logistics course in their support program now. I'll make sure they consider you in it," Eri said with some brightness as she tapped the chip, which projected a hologram of a tech manual. "I want you to read that since it'll be on your entrance exam. You're a big boy now, so take care of everyone." She smiled at him, struggling to hide the quivering as she turned around with Katsuma distracted. Both of them made their way out, making sure to close the shutter doors behind them securely. Eri blinked at the brightness, holding on to Hataru as her eyes adjusted. "Please tell me you were kidding down there, Eri." Hataru barked as he walked with her down the path that cut through the fields. "You're already falling apart keeping Rin together. We both know Katsuma pushed himself that night finding Makio." Eri looked down, her hands clasped as she nodded. "Hataru-kun, how would you feel if you had nothing to live for, waiting for your turn in that bed?" "Can't say I can relate, 'cause I carry my own insurance policy every day." He tapped the concealed dart gun in his back pocket. "Even if Midoriya won't, I will pull the trigger first. I'm not taking anyone down with me this time. Katsuma doesn't have Midoriya like you do anymore. He lost Makio to those thugs. He needs a reason to go on," Eri insisted as they walked, feeling her horn that had been grounded down to a nub from her excessive use. "We both know Katsuma is a lost cause, Eri." Hataru clenched his fist around his toolbox. He's like a little brother to me. Hell, he's better than I was at that age, but we all know the toll his quirk takes on his body without you around. People said the same about me. Chisaki cursed me for killing my parents. Night I thought I was better left contained. Even the drug that should have taken away my quirk didn't work, so Shoda-san came along and proved them all wrong. She remarked fondly. Katsuma needs a light at the end of the tunnel. Doesn't matter if it's a long or short one, he has to steam towards something. Eri said, looking at Hotaru with a forlorn expression. Come on, Eri, it ain't fair when you twist me up like that. He tapped the capacitor. I know you're taking a dig at my expense given I need to be wound up like a Swiss watch by you every year. Just saying, Katsuma needs to focus on being a kid like Rin did. They sure as hell don't want to grow up and miss all this. He waved at the distant city skyline. The implication clear about the kind of society they lived in. He ain't gonna miss that mess. Let them sort it out. We don't need to throw more meat into that grinder. When did you become such an optimist, Hotaru-kun? Eri spoke with a barb of sarcasm. We pessimists drink from the side that's half full, thank you very kindly. No one wants to die thirsty, princess. Hotaru huffed back as he slammed the small door to the hangar open. I just think neither of us can tell those kids what they can do for long. They're growing up too fast and no one wants another Makio. Eri retorted. The comment stung Hotaru, who nodded. Let's agree to disagree, princess. As he was about to kneel down, open the gate to UA when the capacitor on his chest hummed, then hissed angrily. The words of Bakugo, not Midoriya, blared through. To his chagrin, open the fucking gate. Hotaru's tan complexion went white as he looked at Eri, who nodded, hoping her energy would be enough for whatever came next. As he knelt down, she got back and he traced a line in the tarp as he did many times, starting at the midpoint and pulling both arms as far as they would go. The dimensional shear would open like a fabric that had split. Welt in the skin of reality, a dark and flowing satin-like color that was solid yet danced like a liquid spewed out. Bakugo supporting a barely conscious Midoriya who was holding onto the empty syringe. Everyone saw the pool of blood in his gut, with Eri rushing to attend him. Hotaru shoved Bakugo back as he hastily reached into his toolbox and pulled out a utility knife to rip off the fabric. He saw a gaping hole the size of his fist in Midoriya. Lucky that the vacuum had given him precious seconds as Eri was closing it with her rewind. Eri gave him a thumbs up, but most of Midoriya's wound's subdermal flesh was exposed. The hole and organs had been rewinded, but he would have to wait a few days in the hangar till Eri could recover her strength to finish the job. Hotaru glared at Bakugo, who was still in shock, covered in Midoriya's blood and his own, the injection in his hand as Midoriya was still unconscious from the blood loss, while Eri had run off to their freezers to get a blood bag and bandages. Did you choke on him out there? Hotaru asked calmly, through clenched teeth. Bakugo did not look at him as he was transfixed on Midoriya. It was supposed to be me, Bakugo whispered, trembling in rage. Izuku just came in front of me. He slammed his hand on the ground. The small glass shards ground into his glove, their sharp edges digging into his palm. He wouldn't let me do it. Hotaru patted Bakugo's back as he saw him grind the glass in the palm of his gloves. You just found out that's how he rolls. He chuckled as he relished in Bakugo's suffering. Still think he's the villain you've all had a harden for these last 10 years. Bakugo swung his fist at Hotaru, who just pulled back and chuckled as he heard the crack come from his shoulder blade. Bakugo's injuries came back to him with a vengeful recoil as the shock and adrenaline had worn off. He'll be the bad guy so we can feel good about ourselves. If that isn't a hero, I don't know what the fuck is in your book, Thunderclap. He spat at the ground near Bakugo, who looked up at him, struggling to get on his feet, shaking in his boots as he revealed lacerations and small holes in his hero gear. Midoriya only wore normal clothes, taking so many risks from such potent quirks. Hotaru was impressed by Bakugo's determination, but it was punctured by Eri shoving past him. Hotaru had gotten used to playing doctor with Midoriya, though he missed the days when that word had a much more mischievous note to it instead of the morbidity that the current situation extolled. Bakugo went off on his own, hobbling onto a stool nearby, watching with fascination as Midoriya was being put back together again. His worldview had been shattered today. They had tried it his way, and Midoriya still saved him despite being quirkless. It was the slime monster all over again. Midoriya would never change, and somehow that thought both comforted and terrified Bakugo as he saw the man who he thought could never be a hero had shunned a peaceful life lay on that floor bleeding out so many times his accomplices were unfazed by his injury. Bakugo was forced to reconsider after all he saw today. What did it really mean when you call yourself a hero while the world calls you a villain? Jack the Ripper. Tsukachi spoke in a prickly tone, slamming his fist on the table, the frustration in his voice mounting as Bakugo and Midoriya looked at him, their focus diverted from the files splayed over the conference table. Their monthly meetings hadn't yielded results, and the media was tearing into the police as usual, who were a softer target than the well-entrenched heroes. Thought those vultures learned their lesson not to throw us under the bus since Kamino. He lamented as he put down the tablet with the sensationalized headline comparing the uncaught K to Jack the Ripper. The implication, though not openly stated, was clear. The police won't be able to catch the killer because of their incompetence. When did you let the side characters bother you, old man? 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 balked fervently as he motioned over the files. We broke up the 𝐒𝐻𝐼 drug ring. What's left of them wanted to get caught since they've been dropping like flies. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 raised a brow waiting for the point. We got enough trigger to give �1,000,000 a taste of having a quirk. He pointed his thumb at 𝗵𝗃𝗀, who furrowed his brow, muttering in silence as he was looking unnerved at him, which made 𝗧𝗏𝗁 rub his eyes in frustration. Dynamite. It doesn't matter. I'm only standing because the top brass know we have a 99% resolution rate and 𝗵𝗃𝗀 still has a job. He glowered at 𝗵𝗃𝗀. Despite all the tardiness and unexplained injuries, we can overlook that. The paperwork is not a headache as much as covering up for your extracurricular activities. He shot them both with a nauseated look. 𝗵𝗃𝗀 swallowed since he had this lecture that same day when Hotaru was booked by 𝗧𝗏𝗁. Clutching the tablet in his hands as sweat started beading on his forehead. 𝗵𝗃𝗀, I overlook your proclivities because you always come through for me, but this is not like the scandal with the ex-police chief's son. He shot a petrifying glance at 𝗵𝗃𝗀, sending a spike of malice his way. We cannot afford the press spreading rumors about your dealings with the number 3 hero. This isn't like the first time when he was climbing the ranks with you at his side. 𝗵𝗃𝗀's sweat and trembling were minor, but 𝗧𝗏𝗁 was a grizzled veteran who could feel the slightest shift in people as he continued his veiled warning. 𝐭𝐚𝐲 and 𝗂𝐽 are long forgotten by the people, and they only want to be entertained, they don't want to be informed, so be careful. I don't say this much, but please remember, the media can be a bigger threat than 𝗵𝗲 himself to the police. Hey, nothing's happened. Like I'd be caught dead with freckles here. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 replied in an exasperated tone. If I was gonna swing it for the paparazzi, I'd be flashing the hottest piece on the market, not Detective Velcro here. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 sighed and shrugged his shoulders as he shook his head at 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁. Please don't try to fool me, Dynamite. Fortune favors the bold, not fools, and you're pushing your bad luck my way. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁's eyes flashed menacingly, his teeth grinding as he held back whatever he was going to yell back, 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 looking to him pleadingly for his restraint non-verbally. Everyone's fighting to keep their heads above water since 𝗵𝗏𝗀 and 𝗂𝐽. The world saw us drowning, and did nothing. We sank so deep. There was no up or down when it came to AFO, did it, Dynamite? The world didn't treat you fair or equal. But I did. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 flinched as he heard the jabs from 𝗧𝗏𝗁 that landed deep. His hands clenched tightly, fists trembling. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 caught himself before he moved his hand to comfort him under 𝗧𝗏𝗁's diatribe from the past. You floated all the way to the bottom, found there was none, Dynamite. You sank so deep, there was no up or down for you in these last 5 years. Don't toss the fucking shark circling us any more bait that will sink the fucking ship. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 finished in a weary tone, waving his hand to dismiss both 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 and 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁, who stepped out of the room. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 followed 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 into the interrogation room, the only place in the station behind the glass where the surveillance systems had a blind spot, better known as the war room, where you could hash out things and clear the air far from prying eyes. As they got in and 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 locked it behind him while logging the room for the next 30 minutes, he saw 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁's palms spark, feeling the rage and overboiling within him. You're not fucking telling him, you fucking idiot. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 barked as 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 looked away. It's the only thing your himbo and me agree on. It's the only fucking reason he isn't tearing me inside out with that fucking gate of his right now when I'm near you. You're not confessing like some child who dipped his hand in the cookie jar and goes running to daddy. He rushed over and grabbed 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 by the shoulders, shaking him savagely. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 looked away, his lip trembling. It's been 10 years, Kakin. I failed him too much. I just want him to win. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 slapped 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 so hard it left a red mark that scared him more because of how vacant 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 had become since they had cooperated and taken down the 𝗂𝐻𝐼. Hundreds of children in their rings were freed, but knowing that there are bigger fish conducting the trafficking of these singularities only made him lose his resolve, knowing he could do this. He was old and ragged, but it was never going to end. Hotaru and 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 had been keeping him close, taking turns keeping an eye on him in case he had any ideas to confess to 𝗧𝗏𝗁. Even the bathroom was no longer a sanctified place for him unless he was strip-searched for a phone he could use to do it. For the last time, this is why the fuck I burned your shitty notebook back in middle school. You can't be a fucking hero if you keep wanting to end yourself. Some fanboy you are, offing yourself, throwing yourself after kids with the powers of a nuke without thinking for 1 minute about those of us you leave behind. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 barked as he dug his finger between 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁's ribs, jamming it at each syllable. I'm dragging myself through the mud here, Izuku, being so close to you. Hotaru goes to hell waiting for you like some fucking housewife leaving the lamp lit in the window. How long you gonna torture us with this? Get your shit together for everyone who matters. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 snarled as he let him go, throwing him into the wall, closing the gap between them. You think me and Hotaru didn't do shit? We wanna go to the hills and yell out. I've killed villains, blown their fucking heads off back at Jaku and 𝗵𝗏𝗀, you know that. Hotaru got his fucking family killed cause he owed the wrong people favors cause of you. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁's eyes went wide from this, the news hitting him hard since Hotaru and 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 had been getting along, but sharing things like this meant they had reached a level of cooperation he didn't imagine possible between them. Empathy. Not sure whose revenge I'm getting. Don't care. No one's been lower than me ever since you left me. I work hard, die fast. The other way is worse. I don't know where I end and the depths begin because I fucking went too deep. The deep came back with me. Kaken, let me finish this fight. I'm the only one who can with one page. Midoriya grabbed 𝗵𝘃𝐲's hand, hissing as he felt the sparks go off with the madness reflected in 𝗵𝘃𝐲's eyes as the hissing sparks lashed at Midoriya's wrist, his grip tightening. I'd rather break rules than people, and I made exceptions with you. I used to think the helpless fight while the hardened live. I used to fucking think that friends just get in the way, so I don't let anyone and never let anyone in. Look what that got me when we took out AFO. I survived the academy. My instructors didn't that day. Everyone who's ever stood with me is dead or broken. I've been fighting because I'm lost. But mostly, I just fight. That changed 5 years ago when I met you again, Detective Dumbass. Bones shatter and people lie. But I can always count on your iron will, you quirkless loser. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 leaned in, his breath strong as he snorted on Midoriya, his hands trembling as he crushed Midoriya's wrists in them before him close, barely inches apart, while he spoke coldly but forcefully. Don't fucking look down at the rest of us. We aren't doing this for your selfish ass. We're doing it for them. So stop thinking you're the only one going down if this shit does. He pulled Midoriya in for a kiss and unbuttoned his shirt against his will. Though Midoriya had gained muscle and trained as a policeman, taking down people bigger than 𝗵𝘃𝐲, his training failed him from the surprise kiss as he gave in to the momentary pleasure. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 tousled his messy green hair. And then a flash followed by a loud click made Midoriya find the strength he needed to push 𝗵𝘃𝐲 back to trip him over his leg, sending him on his back. The phone slid from his hands with a clear shot of their kiss before it went dark. 𝗵𝘃𝐲's smirk was all the confirmation he needed on the threat. Last person I loved thought I was too reckless. Their loss. He shot back at Midoriya from the floor, catching the floor. Midoriya knew 𝗵𝘃𝐲 was talking about him back in the alley where had caught him red-handed. Virtues. I've got a few. Vices. Heh, a few more. Remember, nerd, I'm not built to win. I'm built to conquer. My life's simple like that, so take the shot or lose the chance to save us. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 got up, flashing the picture in the cracked screen of his phone. His insufferable grin beamed at Midoriya's defeated face as it dawned on him. Which sounds better, loser detective or most villainous hero which makes a target for the sharks as a serial killer story? Kaken, you can't. Midoriya objected as he tried to snatch the phone from 𝗵𝘃𝐲's hand in a panic. If you're waiting for me to give up, we're gonna be here a while, shitty detective. He barked as he gave him the phone. Midoriya's bloodshot eyes dilated as he saw the prompt for the picture to have been uploaded to 𝗵𝘃𝐲's cloud. It didn't matter if he deleted it. The copy would always be there to send at a click. Some things are too important to give up on. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 sneered as he fixed up Midoriya's hair, snatching his phone back from him. So stop looking down on us, loser. We're not going to be left behind. Midoriya could only lean into the wall, letting himself slide down as he looked up at 𝗵𝘃𝐲, those pearly white teeth glinting balefully at him, knowing he was cornered. All he wanted was for everything to be over. He didn't know how much longer he could keep up the lie since they had to catch a killer. The consequences for 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻𝑖 were getting too real for everyone's comfort. Heads were going to roll soon and the public didn't care whose head it was. Weeks had passed by since. Midoriya had not slept except when Eri would force him to with a sedative into a dreamless sleep that ended soon as he closed his eyes. The loss of 𝑅𝐸M cycles were showing their toll on his body since Eri couldn't keep rewinding him to a point where he used to get even those to keep his body and more importantly his mind intact. Hataru, 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻𝑖 and 𝗵𝘃𝐲 were strange bedfellows in the struggle to keep Midoriya from turning into a corpse, though he felt zombified. The only thing that gave him clarity and focus was when he was out in the field with 𝗵𝘃𝐲 officially and unofficially. Most of his agency's files were at Izuku's disposal, but he knew it was a trick to get him to sleep while going through the endless cold calls 𝗵𝘃𝐲 had built up over the time he had taken over Night Eye's agency when he had passed away. Deki and Kirishima helped chat him up in his downtimes, keeping him at ease. He had recently understood the risks 𝗵𝘃𝐲 was willing to take to stop him from throwing away his life, keeping up appearances even though they weren't involved in that way yet. Keeping up the facade helped mask the true nightly activities of tracking down singularities without casting suspicion. He was also sobering up once he learned how both of them had been forced to resign when they were caught packing fudge. Their careers with other agencies drastically cut short as they were blackballed by the industry. The hero world had changed, but not enough that the government could look the other way for public figures like them, pressuring agencies to take action to preserve the moral foundation in the society. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 only made it so far because he worked harder and had dipped into every resource he had in the world to buy his independence one dirty job at a time, taking on bounty hunting and underground hero work to keep the lights on, with Denki and Kirishima just attending to the routine patrols and minor incidents that were above board, keeping them low profile and out of sight from the media. He wondered how they would react if he had confessed to them what they really did and how far their boss had gone for him to get them this far. He had to consider Iri's proposal that day 5 seriously. A topic he had shut the door on several years ago since she brought it up. He was here at the agency to go through Nidai's curated archives with incident reports on the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 raid where he had lost his life. Though ancient history to most and the police files on the incident redacted, he understood now as he confirmed what Iri had been telling him all these years. The anti-quirk drug was developed and ended the career of 𝗵𝗲 until Iri restored his quirk a few years after she had mastered her own. The report confirmed they were using her, but the news hit harder as the follow-up investigations weren't redacted. The photos were clear as day of the lab, the gurney, the equipment. Chisaki rotted away in Tartarus, but his underlings had tried to restart the project. The underground singularities were being located all these years to find another Iri who would reveal the panacea for the sick world of quirks, as Chisaki called it. Iri's heart was in the right place, but when she had saved Katsuma with him, she had lost too much energy doing it. A quirk awakening was no joke, and when it happened in a singularity kit, it was like putting out a fire with a glass of water. Iri would not be able to keep it up with the rates these kids had been popping up with greater frequency. Midoriya knew in Tokyo alone there would be at least around 10,000 cases out of millions of kids that lived there. He had only dealt with nearly 1,010 years, by which many generations had been born that would be problems he'd have to deal with due to the government's programs to encourage birth rates. He needed to treat the root of the problem, not the symptoms, and he knew where to start as he looked at Chisaki's file in Tartarus, but another file was referenced in the AFO folder in conjunction where the League of Villains had made off with the vials he had prepared. He dug through the archives, matching and parsing through the various tomes, the heaving binders, and after a few hours of piecing together the Jaku raid, the battle at Ue, and the aftermath, he finally zeroed in on the location of the only person who could help him. Hyudai Garaki looked less than 40, but his real age shocked Midoriya, as he would be around 80 by now if it wasn't for his quirk. He had experimented on singularities. Hell, he literally wrote the first paper on them back when no one would listen. Midoriya would be listening now as he checked the arrest record, and it was all redacted to his chagrin. At the end of the file was a massive red stamp that spelled out the dreaded words of the devil. HPSC. He wanted to do this alone. Go in, survey and case it out, then make a plan to infiltrate. Hell, he was a detective tracking a murderer. He didn't need to do that since he could just walk in on an official request, so why couldn't he do both? As he pulled out his phone and messaged Tsukachi for a request with the HPSC, sending him a request on the department's preloaded template from his smartphone. He looked at his watch. It was 8 p.m. when he decided to go. Looking at his phone, he had only received a cold acknowledgement from Tsukachi. His stomach sank as he knew the pressure his vigilantism had put Tsukachi under. Some people can't be saved, but it didn't ease the guilt when you were the knife that was stabbing at their heart. As he got onto the bus, he stumbled onto his seat as the bus pulled into gear, reading the short message on his phone for approval. 8 a.m. tomorrow, Udai Sanitarium, Rec ID 3342. Came the reply from Tsukachi, who had distanced himself from Midoriya as he squeezed the phone in his palm. Even if he somehow managed to get the magic bullets that would stop singularities without killing them, the police needed a murderer to slam into a cell. There had to be a trial and a show to redeem Tsukachi, and with Bakugo and Hataru keeping him from confessing with their own self-destructive threats, he was backed into a corner when he finally had an epiphany. He got off the bus and went into the alley in Camino. A ritual of his is a pilgrim on the hero's journey. This is where it began for him when AFO was beaten and the League of Villains was left crippled, but they always rebounded. A grim reminder to put down a threat to prevent the next Jaku as he took out his shortwave radio, tuning into Hataru's frequency after putting on his rebreather. He had a plan and he needed the right villain to pull it off. No one was going to like what he had in mind.